little bit later. Marta will also be in probably around 2 o'clock.
Two?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so a couple of introductory remarks, and then I'll turn it over to the team. Who will, as open as fine. This is one of my fronts. This is being on YouTube, right? And it will be recorded, and so the workshop will be available. The team, everybody who's got a speaking role or potentially has the ability to respond to questions is by and large in the room, with a couple of exceptions, and then we can pull on issues as they come up. I would say that this obviously stems from the real situation facing St. Albert, but there was a few questions that led to this. One was about the FIA, about how those were calculated. This really stems in large part to our work on financial stability or sustainability as part of one of your council goals. And so looking at sustainable growth of St. Albert, not only in terms of money, but in terms of the process and the planning, the architecture driven by the MTB download. The team will bring you through it all. You'll see that not really relating this to any in-depth discussions on things happening in St. Albert right now. If you want to have those, that would be probably a camera discussion that we can react if we needed to on that particular front. And so the team will keep it generic, and just wanted to provide that context. There is no prep package on purpose because this is meant to be sort of an educational discussion at the end of the day, and it'll go where you need to go. So perhaps I'll stop there and turn it over to Adrian.
Yeah. Just I'll cover a couple of basics and I'll get into my speaking notes. First thing, I'm going to apologize because this first page of my own notes is probably as much as I speak in a week normally, so it's going to be a lot for me. One of the first things I'm going to ask you to do is think about the places, cities that you've been to that you would like to live in or move to.
Singapore.
Well, recency bias. It's recency bias. Just keep that in the back of your mind, and then ask you a little bit later to think about kind of the whys about that, and we'll kind of go around and do some sharing about that. That's just something that I want to kind of touch on. So I'll just start out by saying that we want to start by recognizing the numerous decisions that council is asked to make on a regular basis related to growth and development. As you're aware, these decisions have short, medium, and long-term impacts on the community, and those decisions have an impact on the financial sustainability beyond individual council terms. Over the last 8 years, the way that communities in the region, including St. Albert, have been growing is changing, and as such, we need to adapt through decisions we make and choices for community growth to ensure sustainability of our community now and for the future generations. And when I refer to the 8 years, that's basically the EMRB growth plan, which mandates our densities. The purpose of today's presentation is to provide council with an overview of some growth trends, density implications, fiscal considerations, and an overall kind of discussion about sustainable growth of the city. And our hope is that when you leave today, you'll have enough information to be champions of sustainable growth in the community. Presenting with me today are Ann Victor, Darius Lokar, Stephen Bannerman, and Christina Piener. We worked together to ensure that the information you receive not only provides planning development insights, but also implications on assessment and taxation, financial implications, and the city's planning framework. Katie Mahoney and Stephen Graham were also crucial to the preparation, but were not able to be here today. And as we present, please feel free to ask any questions that you might have about the information that we share. To help us stay on topic, we'll create a parking lot for those questions. And then if we don't address them through the presentation, we'll circle back and we'll just make sure that we're trying to address everything that you have as far as questions. We'll also be taking breaks at the end of each of these sections, just because this is, I could give an expression that my dad used. It's a lot of information in a little bit of time. So I'll just say it as that, keep it PC. But yeah, we will be taking breaks at the end of each of these topics. So again, as I mentioned, we'll start with the overview of growth in Canada, Alberta, and Edmonton. Then we'll move into the St. Albert specific trends, how forecasts for growth, how we can prepare for growth, etc. Following that, we'll talk about the role of density in building community, and then a little bit about financial considerations and implications of growth, and then wrapping up about discussing alignment plans, actions, and an effort to keep St. Albert sustainable. So as I'm sure you've heard, Alberta is calling, Canada is calling. We've seen a lot of growth, both nationally and provincially in the last year. So last year, Canada saw a population increase of 1.28 million people, bringing the country's population to approximately 41 million. Of this, Alberta saw the highest growth rate, 4.4%, as shown on the screen. So approximately 200,000 people moved into the province. This is relatively unprecedented growth within both Canada and Alberta. And this is the largest year-over-year population increase since 2001 when this statistic was created. As far as who is moving into Alberta, as we mentioned, there's a lot of promotion Alberta is calling. The majority of migration is from out of province, international migration, so 31,000 roughly, with smaller percentages coming from Ontario, BC, and the other provinces and territories. And then this is important to know because this, I guess, this is a consideration as we continue to grow, what type of housing need may be out there and what type of housing that the city is providing right now. So again, it's influential to understand what our immigration levels are in order to know how to support that immigration. So as we get more local, in 2023, the Edmonton metropolitan region had a growth population rate of 4.2%, and that outpaced all of the recent oil boom years, so 2006, 7, 13, 14, and it's bigger than all those. And the biggest prior to this last year was 3.2% in 2014. So it's not even by a small amount, it's a decent amount of extra growth from the boom years. St. Albert also experienced a significantly higher population growth rate in 2023, with almost 1,300 people moving into the community. And this is reflected in our building permits and our unit counts, and we're seeing it already in 24. I think I've shared our building statistics with council members. So right now,
but we haven't done a census. So where are you getting the number?
The government of Alberta has population estimates.
Yes.
And correlates to the building.
Yeah, so
Okay, so use some sort of.
yeah, we have to, so because we didn't do a census for what, 6 years, I guess, something like that, we've kind of had to use other sources to kind of fill in the gaps. And they're close. I don't think they're exactly what we find when we do our own censuses, but they're close.
Just so specific.
1284?
84.
Yeah. 83, not 85. But what we are seeing that, so with the building permits, we're at 750 units permitted already this year through May. And there's only been 3 years since 1992 that have had more than 700 in a year. So we're seeing a lot of interest. The developers tell us multi is a huge demand right now. The single family is still kind of going, but multi is, whereas a couple of years ago, they were complaining that we forced them to have multi-sites. Now they're wishing they had more multi-sites because they can sell them. So things are changing in how we grow. While Alberta saw unprecedented growth last year, this population increase for St. Albert does fall into the high range of the projected growth used to forecast population growth by the EMRB. So it's at the high end, but it is within kind of that. Normally we say 1.2 to 1.8, depending on how bullish you are on growth rates for the city.
The council has a poll on what our census numbers are.
Yeah, I had heard.
What do you think?
Yeah.
I'm putting right now.
I looked back at some of the old forecasts and applied it. It should be in the 72s somewhere. I think that's what Marta even mentioned. Low 72s, maybe mid 72s. I don't know.
I think Sheena was the highest at 74,000. So you're
Could be
wrong.
wrong.
Could be wrong. Don't have a, yeah,
Another.
72 something is not a guess though.
72, 135.
There you go.
1, 3, 5. Got it.
Me too.
Yeah, so St. Albert has typically seen a little bit slower growth rate than some of the other communities in the region. We are aware of that. So again, like more around that 1.2% over the past 10 years is kind of more in the ballpark. While St. Albert grew 1.8%, Edmonton grew 2.2%, which is fairly significant given their population base existing. And then overall, the region grew by 4.2%. So that's also, again, that's a significant number given the base of population that's already there.
So which one's growing the most? Because if we're overall 4 and they're 2 and we're 1.8, we have to have some about that average, right? So
Beaumont.
Yeah.
really,
Yeah, Spruce Grove.
what are they growing at? I'm not trying to match them, I'm just asking.
I don't have that. I know that I think it was somewhere in the order of 5%.
And so when we talk about the base population, there is kind of like, if we're 70,000 growing at 1.8%, maybe equal to Beaumont growing at 4%. There's numbers like pure numbers wise.
Yeah, they hit about the same estimated growth rate for Beaumont. They added about 1,200.
In raw numbers of new people, 1,284 exactly showed up.
Yeah. Was that 4.2 like net Edmonton region growth, or is it like you're 5.5%, you're 1.8%, you average to 3.9? Like, is it which is, do we do the average growth of each area, or is this like net numbers growth of 4.2?
That's the net of the region, of the Edmonton region. Significant growth, yeah. I didn't look at
Yeah.
Really?
which is even more significant given they were over 1 million already. Yeah.
They're booming bust.
Huge number.
Well, Airdrie and Cochrane are.
Yeah, just blowing up.
Canada.
Yeah, just blowing up. So Stephen is going to talk about the housing stuff.
So as our city matures, the collective goal is to improve housing diversity so that growth in all demographic occurs. And you can see on this slide on the right-hand side, if you're missing the single detached, we'll get you a better set of classes. St. Albert is dominated by low-density detached homes, and an increasing variety of housing types such as townhomes, apartment buildings has emerged in recent years in the growth of those subcategories. As the city grows, a variety of housing options in appropriate locations is needed to meet our increasing diverse housing needs and, importantly, the preferences of our citizens. This includes seniors who are downsizing, those with unique housing needs, younger individuals, and families seeking affordable starter homes, as well as newcomers to Canada. Oops, missed my notes. Assessment growth. With 2023's historic growth rates, you can see the shift in physical assessment brought onto market. So in that little yellow bar, that's 2%. That's pretty good for St. Albert. 2% growth over our last 5 years is a decent amount of assessment growth. And single detached homes met that criteria this year. What's interesting is the disparity between the single detached, the townhomes, the semi-detached, and the apartment inventories. So the walk-up apartment category, which is rentals, grew by a staggering 17.9%, followed by semi-detached, which is duplexes. Planning and I have a different code for duplexes. All semi-detached for 4.5%, and townhousing grew by 3.3%. So the importance of this slide is the way in which St. Albert grows is changing dynamically from the past, with higher demand for multifamily choices. This is in part due to the associated housing costs, and we all know that they're both increasing substantially, and income ratios within St. Albert. On the right hand of the slide is the median incomes of all houses that are combined. The St. Albert median income is 117 per thousand, or 117,000 per year. This is a bit of a dated slide. It's 2001's CMHC statistics. So it's not an assessment one, but it gives you a good idea of the income related to single family, as well as other low cost housing. So it gives you an idea of the median amount that you would need to live in those types of housing.
If you were buying new today.
Well, in 2021, so it's gone up. We certainly go up today. Because how we grow is changing. We need to start looking how to facilitate growth and the impacts on our municipality.
I think this is my slide. Thank you. To ensure well-planned growth, the city conducted several studies to understand the impacts of growth and development. Most recently, Flourish and the annexation documents studied the impacts of growth. And these studies were completed by ISL Engineering, Urban Strategies, and Corvus Business Advisors. Flourish, which is our MVP, has a growth rate that reflected a conservative year-over-year growth rate of 1.3%, which represents the historical average of growth within St. Albert, and is in line with provincial forecasting. The annexation growth rate reflected a midline growth rate of about 1.6%, so higher than Flourish, and it calculated that growth rate over 50 years. So, and then if COSA, the city of St. Albert achieved the bullish growth rate that was the highest end of the EMRB strategies, it was at 2.1%. The city would achieve a population of approximately 155,000 people within 40 years versus 30. So your growth rate does determine how fast your population grows. Needless to say, the city has a significant land bank for future development, but we need to be intentional about how we use that land to ensure that we have a well-balanced growth and financial sustainability.
So all of those growth rates, except for maybe the high for lower than what we had in 2022.
Yeah, so it's the the correcting year, right? Because the previous 5 years, we were at about 0.9% before 2023. Yeah. Right, so this next slide is about sustainable growth, and this is the goal that's written in Flourish. I'll just read it for everyone. St. Albert optimizes its land infrastructure and financial resources to support intensification and outward growth that together attract a diverse range of residents and businesses. And this is the first, so there's no test, but this is the first set of questions that we wanted to throw out to you and just kind of ask, what does sustainable growth look like to you? What does this term even mean? And Daria is going to collect all your inputs.
Right or wrong answer.
Yeah.
Just the.
Not all at once, though.
Sure. I mean, one kind of easy point is like when we build a road and pipe and, you know, all the infrastructure that goes with it, that we're able to maintain it and replace it in 40 years. Through property taxes and other stuff that we have going on. Instead of, you know, having things crumble in 40 years.
I think the sustainable, and beyond the normal definition of sustainable, to me, sustainable growth in St. Albert means is that we build the St. Albert of the future without losing the St. Albert of the past. So that means that we don't, you know, plow everything down and build, you know, 15-story high rises from here to the horizon. It's a community that you can understand was St. Albert, is St. Albert, continue to be St. Albert, and still build to the city of the future. To me, that's the challenge that we're facing.
Yes.
To me, sustainable means being able to supply the needs of what people in the community that are living here want, not necessarily what we may want, but and always sustainable means all the citizens being able to pay their taxes, and then again, just not growing beyond ourselves. Sometimes planning projections can be quite a bit off sometimes, so careful planning, accurate planning, I guess.
I think what the other friend says good. I think it used to be at St. Albert that what drew you to St. Albert is maintained. The features you're looking for are actually maintained. And then they're not compromised in the name of something, because that compromising in the name of something basically just means you're taking it away. So, and then also just that our infrastructure is actually planned so that it can doesn't require surprise infrastructure investments halfway through like we had Number 9, that kind of stuff. Now, back when it was built, it wasn't like that was a while ago, but you want to be able to plan so you don't have surprise $40 million bills that can go, as Natalie mentioned. That's what I said. They've kind of.
I think, to me, it means that not only what the city itself does, but it's what our schools can sustain, it's what our hospital medical can sustain, it's what our sporting recreation facilities can sustain. It's kind of a bigger picture to me that because I think a lot of cities get in trouble where they grow so quick that they kind of crumble in themselves because they don't have all of the other things that are able to sustain and maintain it. So that would include our green space as well. Like we want to grow in a way that all of those elements that have attracted people here, kind of the live, work, and play story, is sustainable in the long term. So not just looking at, number of houses or density even, but all of the other things that hospitals, like you said, and schools that make it sustainable.
I would just say, slow and steady growth, so it's predictable, so we can plan. I would never want to see 10% growth in St. Albert, but 1.8 seems reasonable. I think it's important to make sure that St. Albert has space for everyone, so I don't want us to just be welcoming to people that have money, or those that currently live here stay here and their kids have to move out. So there needs to be a good mix of demographics living in the city. Complete. And I would say probably less reliance from outside, less reliance on provincial grants, less reliance on Edmonton for services. For us to be sustainable, we have to be complete.
To add, Kathy, to your comment and to Mike's, I think too, it's about thinking differently about using what we already have. That's district heating, so that we're not relying on a power grid that might be failing, whether it's using rainwater for flushing toilets, so that we're not reliant on a water source that might not be reliable in the future. Whether that's using our schools, which are empty most of the time, differently, so we can actually kind of have places for kids to do stuff. So I would say a lot of that is rethinking what we already have so that it works better for us in the future.
Ken says ditto.
I think Stephen's got the next point.
That's what I was gonna say. Ken's comment was make sure the sewer pipes are big enough.
Yeah,
So-
So I really like the responses because the next part of it falls right into that. So growth as a short-term fiscal strategy is appealing. Initially, one would assume the tax revenue would offset the budget increases, so you just have more houses to tax. And you would have a decrease if we kept the same amount of services. There are more properties taxed and more revenues generated. However, depending on the location, type, and scale of development, this isn't always the case. So you immediately think of roads and underground servicing and snow clearing, but what initially isn't apparent is the cost of the overall city, which includes fire, police, recreation services, FCSS. So those people-based services we don't think about as often. Additionally, after the new wears off, neighborhoods begin to age. Existing services like road maintenance and infrastructure, repair for sanitary, water, storm sewer management are all required through the lifetime of a neighborhood. At this stage, the new neighborhood tax generation doesn't outpace the municipal need. And as such, to ensure fiscal sustainability, development needs to meet or exceed long-term goals and costs.
So the previous MDP city plan viewed all growth as positive growth. However, it must be cautioned that that's not always the case, Stephen has mentioned. While new growth revenue may help offset the tax increases in the short term as the city ages, low density and low intensity development will have a net negative impact on the city's financial health. Our most recent MDP Flourish considers the longer term effects and looks to balance the type, scale, and location of growth to improve that fiscal sustainability. And I must stress that this goal was deemed to be the most important based upon the community feedback that we heard through the MDP process, through Flourish's conversations. Property taxes are a primary source of revenue for Canadian municipalities. Historically, St. Albert has had a high proportion of residential neighborhoods and a relatively low proportion of commercial and industrial land. Designating new commercial and industrial areas is one way the municipality can achieve a balance. The other way is to be about strategic about where and when we invest to facilitate growth. Commercial and mixed use areas and industrial properties provide new tax revenue that can help reduce the tax burden on residents while providing local jobs and opportunities for business owners. And as such, sustainable growth is a key. My note here is not a very good note, so I should just leave, but it's sustainable growth is key to keeping our revenue and expenses in line. All right, so the next little while you're gonna, I think, hear talk quite a lot, so I apologize. Current direction for growth. So to ensure smart decisions about land development in the city, we need a plan. And as such, the city adopted Flourish, which looks ahead at today's realities and tries to anticipate the city's future needs. So much to the point that you brought up, Wes. As the city matures, the community needs to be adaptable for the future needs and the changing conditions like demographic changes, climate changes, economic diversification, income disparity, affordable housing technology, and workforce needs and healthcare. With this, we also need a municipal administration that is able to adjust and respond to the community through strategic planning for community growth, service delivery, decision-making, and investments to ensure this long-term fiscal sustainability. Luckily, Flourish provides direction for future development of the city, but it is a deviation from the old MDP. And we used an example slide of, you can see what St. Albert looks like today, but the policies within it enable us to move towards some of those needs that we might have into the future. And Flourish talks a lot about this. And the goals of the old MDP reflected the era that they were crafted. So again, you know, I think city plan was first adopted in early 2000. At that time, people were looking at that idea of larger houses on some smaller lots, big box stores, greenfield growth, and it was tremendously successful in its implementation. So if we stick to the vision and goals of Flourish, we feel we'll be successful with that as well. Historically, St. Albert's growth development has occurred primarily through the building of neighborhoods and business districts at the edge of the built-up city through incremental approval of area structure plans and subdivision. The city will continue to grow outward, but it needs to do so strategically by addressing municipal infrastructure constraints and optimizing future infrastructure. At the same time, growth within the built-up city, referred to as intensification, needs to be encouraged to achieve a complete city and one that offers more choices for housing, amenities, and mobility. And I think that speaks to your point, Mayor Herron. Policies within the MDP have been created to identify optimal areas of growth and broadly describe how the city should develop in terms of land uses and densities, along with identifying priority areas for outward growth and the priority areas for intensification. With the incorporation of the annexation lands, the map did change. However, the fundamental principles of the policy areas did not. So looking at this map, this is the original map from Flourish before we added on the land. And it's hard to see, but the west was identified as your primary area for outward growth. And then the intensification area was along St. Albert Trail. And if Adrian hits the button, you'll see the new map. We made a few changes to make it a little bit more clear, but it's saying the same thing. So you might be asking, oh, so next slide.
But you didn't have a, you have a
No, I was just making a rude comment about your abilities to push the button.
I'm shaking.
So you may be asking yourself, well, how did we choose the hybrid growth strategy, which is what we ended up with? Well, was done through the public engagement process, and the city weighed these 3 different growth scenarios. Ultimately, a combination of scenario 1 and 3 were chosen. Scenario 1 really focused on greenfield growth to the west, and that was because of utilizing the investments within Ray Gibbon Drive and trying to move traffic off of St. Albert Trail. We also had the community amenities site that was chosen at the time. There was already some greenfield community development and ability to use those that already approved area would actually accommodate a lot of the growth over the next 25 years. And then it also incorporated the industrial lands. We also looked at growing and focusing to the north. And it would have continued to move people along St. Albert Trail and have a higher reliance on transit. And it also would have had a greenfield residential focus, but it wouldn't have been as prominent with its employment land goals. And then scenario 3 was focusing on the spine along St. Albert Trail. This was an intensification strategy, so that the goal would have been at 50% of all development would have been infill or intensification. And it would have been transit focused. So that would be the way that you try to get traffic off of St. Albert Trail. So Flourish provides the key direction of where and what type of growth, and the city's strategic goal of achieving 30% of all new development occurring as redevelopment or infill as we approach 100,000 people. This is an important goal as it will help the city achieve sustainability, environmental resilience, agricultural preservation, infrastructure efficiency, community vibrancy, economic diversification, and importantly, corporate fiscal solvency. As St. Albert grows and evolves, more opportunities will arise for accommodating both residential and employment growth within the built-up city. Flourish encourages and guides such growth. The strategic locations for intensification are downtown and on the commercial lands along St. Albert Trail, particularly those that are close to a future rapid transit station. As well, ongoing opportunities will arise to sensitively intensify existing neighborhoods with new compatible forms of housing that keep the community healthy and attractive. By increasing the focus on intensification, the city allows the city services to reach more residents at a lower cost. Development within the existing neighborhoods and along St. Albert Trail will save taxpayers money because additional roads, sewers, services, and infrastructure associated with building out are not needed or to the same extent as with it enables increased use of existing city investments like parks, libraries, schools, and fire services, fire halls. As we focus on intensification, future development decision and budget considerations must support the intensification of the city. This goes to Councillor Hughes' comments. This includes prioritization of projects to support infill and intensification and not just focusing on outward growth. In simplistic terms, looking at setting aside X amount of the budget for capital charters to support ongoing intensification. The city has started to embark on the infill strategy and by updating the land use bylaw, but additional work is necessary to promote and facilitate the strategic goal. And we are starting to see examples of intensification or infill. 22 St. Thomas is one of them. East Village and Riverbank Landing are also examples of this.
Christina, will the info strategy look at the underground capacity of water, sewer, storm, and above ground roads?
At a high
Because eventually we can't put more people in there if there's not enough capacity, right?
Yeah, so that at a high level, it will. We just haven't figured out exactly how far we'll look into it. But again, a lot of these neighborhoods, we've got Regan here to talk a bit about the underground utilities, but I'll talk about road networks. These roads were designed to actually have a higher population because some of the older neighborhoods have declined so much in population.
Right.
That they can actually withstand almost doubling before you'd have to do road investments.
I remember when we, at the beginning of last, we had the approval, it was shortly after the election of that development on Sturgeon Road. We heard over and over, the road is way too big for the amount of traffic currently there, and there's a ton of underground, so that made it easier.
Yeah.
But as we further intensify, we might have to start prioritizing nodes that this
Yes.
is more important than this node because of the capacity kind of stuff, right?
It's also once the province gets on board, it's like, why do you need water to flush a toilet? Like, absolutely,
Yeah.
like, I wish Percy was in the room, like, there's absolutely no need to
You
literally.
do need water to flush the toilet because you gotta get that matter down to a waste.
You don't
No.
need, so you don't need potable water.
You don't need.
Oh, no, sorry, you don't need a pipe. The technology exists out there for processing that really well. It's expensive right now, but in 20 years it won't be. And so if you don't even need to flush a toilet, like it's just not a thing you do. You just take your little, like, pack it out once a week or whatever, like you would your garbage. That's coming. So,
Yeah.
The province has to get on board first, but.
Well, Christina, with redevelopment, along St. Albert Trail, for example, we've got some empty sites like the Mohawk Station, the old, I don't know, Rent-A-Wreck Station, and some places that are just sitting empty, and they're, I think maybe polluted land, or
Brownfield.
they've got some brownfield problems with them. So developers would, I'm thinking, would look at that land versus just nice, clean greenfield land along the trail and say, I'm gonna go over there. Are there inherent barriers to redevelopment that are more challenging to overcome? Because like, we have the road there, we have the sewer and the water and blah, 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 but the chunk of land is just not super attractive financially. In a great location, but it's not financially as attractive as just going to a nice.
Because of the
clean-
remediation.
Yeah, the remediation costs, or those kind of challenges. How do we address that?
It's a pretty complex question, to be honest with you, and I don't know if we'll get through it all. We're gonna try to address some of it throughout this presentation, but you know, it is this is, we can come back to it. Yeah, I think we can come back to it, but it is, you know, kind of keeping that idea, and maybe not just brownfield sites, but how do you make the existing community attractive enough for reinvestment is part of it too, right? Because you don't want neighborhoods to go into states of decline either. Not something to keep in mind. Slide.
And in the future, if we talk about incentives or pieces like that, that's where, like, that piece that Christina's talking about is the intensification pieces and the lower cost of services and infrastructure already there. So we'll be referring to that. But if you were looking at incentives in the future, it'd probably be more in those, because it's the existing services and infrastructure are already there for the city. So that is an important point to kind of keep in mind for later discussions.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about infill, and it falls under the category of intensification. So Flourish looks ahead, considering today's realities, and tries to anticipate the city's future needs. As St. Albert matures, the reality is that the city is now 25 years older than the old NDP accounted for. And existing communities within St. Albert that were built in the 1950s makes them approximately 50 to 75 years old. the house or commercial space of the 1950s doesn't always meet today's needs. Based upon development trends and the sustainability needs, Flourish has anticipated that infill will have a growing importance on the city's land development community and making it less reliant on greenfield for land development. It is anticipated the majority of infill will occur where development can be further enhanced, like shopping centers, parking lots, or replacement of some of the older residential properties. In this example, it demonstrates a community that a community can be revitalized. At the top, you've got, I would suggest, probably 1940s housing that does not meet the needs of today's family, and it's replaced with 2 homes. This adds 2 additional families with growing children to attend the elementary, middle, and high school, which are all within walking distance, along with the existing commercial areas that are also adjacent to this neighborhood. It adds significant property assessment to the area and reduces the chance of the older neighborhood going into decline. Within St. Albert, an infill project in Grandin, where a large lot was subdivided into 2 duplex lots. The lot and improvement value prior to subdivision was approximately $219,000. After subdivision and improvements, lot A was assessed at $434,000 and lot B was assessed at $445,000 for a total of $880,000.
So you get 4 times the property taxes, approximately.
Right. So that is my next statement. Exact dollars received were roughly quadrupled prior to subdivision and construction of the duplexes.
One question there, like that 219, would that have been like several years prior to the 4, because I mean, 1,000 square foot bungalow, 900 is $400,000 now, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so it wouldn't matter. So even if that bungalow was worth $400,000, basically we're saying divide it in half and replace it with 2
$600,000
it would be
houses.
worth, each of them would be worth $800,000 then. Yeah.
How do
Just
you,
thinking you had the timing of the first one well ahead of when the other ones were built in, right?
how do you define gentle to the community?
Well, Adrian's going to talk about that later on when it comes to density, but it is making sure that you have an idea. I guess, to me, I guess I'll throw that to you. Looking at these 2 slides, they are different, but it's the exact same location, just 10 years difference. There's some things that have changed, obviously, in the 10 years, but does it feel significantly different? Does it look
Might
significant?
not to me, but if I'm living right next to it, I might.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's the issue that we got to wrestle with infill. Is number one, developers, they don't want to do infill. They want 40 acres of greenfield because it makes so much more money out of it.
Yeah.
And the residents are hesitant to let people in, and yet that's what we have to do. So the question that Mike asked, how do you incent people to actually do that? And how do you prepare the community that this is going to happen? And oh, by the way, it's in their best interest that it does.
It's conversation, it's public engagement, really. You have to understand the concerns that the residents have. And then sometimes it is just seeing what's happening around. I would suggest this community probably 10 years ago was a little bit more resistant to infill, but after seeing it happen and seeing it done in a respectful way, that it hasn't changed the characteristics that they love within their community. They like their boulevards, they like their front porches, they like that idea. And that's still maintained. So kind of finding those key community values and trying to incorporate them within the development decision.
I don't disagree with you. And I think the key here to me is gentle, because what was happening in Edmonton was not so gentle.
This is Edmonton.
Well, but not all of it was like that. When it was first introduced, there was no architectural guidelines. They had huge, I've seen pictures of something I wouldn't want next to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
What's like that horrible house on, was it Aikens Drive? Like as you're going past Gish, infill, it's just.
It's only one house though, it's just.
Yeah, but that's what he's talking about. It's just totally doesn't fit the neighborhood.
So It's not gentle, I guess.
Differences in architectural style, differences in heights, et cetera. Those are the things that stand out, right? Yeah, and it is,
This particular neighborhood, so Aaron lived 2 blocks away from there, until he moved to St. Albert 7 years ago. And so his kid, Elliot, walked to school from his mom's house in Westmount for the last, from K to 6. And people got over it. They hated infill when it started, and then they figured out how good it was for the neighborhood, because all of a sudden there were kids in the neighborhood again, and all of a sudden the schools stayed open, and like this is all kind of showing skinny houses, but there's tons of duplexes. Aaron was living in a row house 2 blocks away from there. A lot of these new builds put in garage suites. So it's not just that, and they all have back alleys and everything.
The question you asked was,
What's that?
everyone's dropped this one. There is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's my point. I mean,
It's hard.
I'm just trying to point out what I see as we go down this path. It's not going to be an easy thing, but you define gentle to the people that this is going to come in, and you say this is what's going to happen, and this is why it's going to happen. I think the road is a lot easier. And you might get some developers that say, hey, if I do 100 of these houses, it might be worth my time.
This is outside of the presentation, but we are seeing a growing development industry for the infill product. It's not just greenfield.
But again, like the neighborhoods evolve over time too, because young families will move in as seniors move out, and a lot of them just renovate the homes and change them. It doesn't necessarily have to be an infill project to take the space of that as well. And there was comments on a tour we were on the other night, some people living in Westmount area, they've renovated their homes. They consider their homes new and beautiful and whatever, but at the end of the block, they've got a 4-plex there, and they took out every tree. And so the whole area of the block changed, and it's not even in compliance. So now there's all these issues with this big, huge building that's not in compliance, that's essentially destroyed the block in their mind, right? When they've put all this money into renovation and beautification of the neighborhood as well. So it depends on who's doing the work, I guess, right?
And it can happen with the big house as well, right?
Yeah.
Again, you own a lot, that's your property. You can, within the confines of the land use bylaw, you can pull it down and build a pretty large house, a giant house too, right next to a 1940s, 800 square foot little bungalow.
I think we have to be cautious that the options are always there. So if somebody still wants that house, 1,500 square feet on a big lot, we just make sure that it's still okay.
And then this is just another example of commercial spaces as well. It's not just infill for residential. So this again is an older style shopping center. It shut down. I think it used to have one of the most famous bars where all the Oilers hung out back in the day. So I remember hearing the stories.
No, I know that place very well.
Yeah.
Well, I was there a lot for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
I was working.
So it came down, and now it's been replaced with a 2-story full commercial with underground parking. 124th Street, 109 Ave.
Yeah, it used to be the grinder.
Okay.
Name is very descriptive.
That's really new. Yeah, it's like into that restaurant. Another new one, yeah.
It wasn't a coffee shop.
Yes,
I love that. That is
great.
That's the brewery district?
West Block, no, it's
42nd and Stony Place.
Stony Plain, yeah.
Yeah.
It's 3 or 4 fantastic restaurants in there, pub shop. Office space.
And that would be more of the intensification side of the scale versus the infill.
Okay,
But that's right on the LRT. So.
yes,
It will be.
and it took forever to get that thing built. Yeah, I think a few different owners.
So we'll go to the next slide. All right, so infill is a good thing from both the public's and city's perspective, and it adds to the vibrancy of the city, enables reinvestment to occur. It is important that the municipality capitalize on existing infrastructure without having to build or invest in new systems.
Joey.
Hold on. Hold on, I'm jumping the gun here. I was trying to be ready and I got ahead of it.
You can tell he went to management, right? You can tell. You can really tell he went up to management.
Infill is important as it enables the municipality to capitalize on existing infrastructure or invest in new systems. This provides a positive return on investment. And before you say, oh, these old systems, they can't handle the added growth pressures, you're both right and wrong. Older neighborhoods were more people within them and are conservative and old conservative ideas for water consumption and water use actually now enable additional capacity. The other thing is that the city will have to invest that in these areas to ensure that these pipes and roads are maintained. But the areas where it really ensures efficiencies are within the soft services like schools, parks, fire halls, police stations. Such. I could go on, but there's a video that says it much more eloquently than I can.
Make it full screen?
No.
I'd have to watch it on YouTube. Hold on. I can.
Make it bigger.
What? The ad.
We gotta wait for the commercial.
We gotta get the commercial.
Hit skip, dude. You can hit skip.
Who's driving?
Probably next.
No, no.
Connected. That's subtitle, so we'll be good.
Haven't hit play yet, Adrian. You're doing close enough for government.
He's not driving anymore.
Whoa. Are you good?
Have it on pause. Yep, come on.
Sound first.
Sound isn't there.
Really ready. This- plug that.
I believe in you, Adrian.
Be there. You have any
Go back
change?
to the original size. It will work.
That's fine.
Or the YouTube?
So I just think they should be trying to on his computer. It was hired before.
Two set of speakers for your laptop.
Let's do it here. See if this works.
It's not changed.
I would check yourself.
Speakers, I got one on my desk. Or speaker. Yeah.
Yeah, just give me video already, Adrian, at this point.
Break.
Tip play, we'll just squint, it's okay.
The graphics aren't that important.
Your sound? Put on your sound. Okay.
I've seen this video.
Redevelopment. Infill can be achieved by developing vacant or underused land within existing urban areas that are already developed. It often results in a greater variety of housing options, including single detached homes, multi-unit homes and apartments, but it can also take the form of offices or stores. This variety helps meet the diverse needs of a growing and changing community, whether it's someone getting their first place, a family moving to a new neighborhood, or an older couple looking to downsize in the neighborhood they love. Redevelopment occurs when an existing building is converted or expanded into another use. Often, an underutilized building or property can offer more to the community if it's redeveloped because it brings residents closer to jobs and community services, boosts the neighboring economy, and increases overall livability. Both are important ways to create more sustainable cities because roads, public transit, water, wastewater, and other utilities are already in place. Infill and redevelopment provide Kitchener with an exciting opportunity to create new places for people to live, work, and play. They bring new neighbors, more children to existing schools that have declining enrollment, more shoppers to support businesses, and more diversity to our communities. Some community members in established neighborhoods may wonder about the impact of these changes and how it could affect them. How will this affect parking or traffic on the streets around the neighborhood? Will there be too much light at night? Will there be privacy in backyards next to taller buildings? City staff review each proposed infill and redevelopment plan as part of the site plan review process to ensure it's appropriate for our growing city and to minimize negative impacts on neighboring properties. A great city needs caring, informed, and engaged residents. For more information on the site plan review process and when residents can get involved, watch our site plan video explainer.
As we do our info strategy, say that we should make a video. soon with that.
Yeah, but people right next door to Riverbank are still gonna be mad. Like,
You could add into the video and sometimes
It
it's
sucks.
makes a decision that's not gonna make everybody happy, right? That was hard.
.ca/planning. At parking lot,
I take it back.
I can take one back.
His ability, his management ability.
This is just button.
Push the button.
All right, so
Yeah,
that was infill, and now we're gonna talk about intensification. So intensification is the opportunity to redevelop larger parcels of land and significantly increase the density and intensity of an existing parcel. This type of development needs to be strategically located, as it can add to the vibrancy of key locations. However, in the wrong place and with poor urban design, this type of development can cause additional challenges for the city and its residents. As such, it's important that the city is strategic about these locations and the criteria within it. Intensification needs to build upon the existing community assets while adding amenities to the area like transit, jobs, and commerce. It is important to note that infill and its potential to occur is impacted by infill and intensification. It is important to note that both of those are impacted by the amount of greenfield development that is available. Too much greenfield land will limit the need for infill or intensification to occur. So it is important to have a balance between the two different types of development form.
Can I ask one question with intensification along the trail? How are you planning on alleviating traffic that's there? I mean, the people that live in those apartments may perhaps take transit home, but there's still the traffic that's always been there and always will be there. So how are you changing that on St. Albert Trail?
Well, I think this is where, as the city evolves, how people get around also changes. So hopefully you'll start to see with increased transit service, better reliability, that other people that normally would have driven may have the opportunity to go down from, say, 2 cars in their household to 1 and take transit. You need to be very targeted with that type of investment for it to occur properly. Because if it's not, you're just going to add more and more traffic. Yeah.
How do you deal, can we just ask, but
Yeah.
how do you deal with, in some areas, particularly in Edmonton, where, like you described it, where the neighborhood has declined to such that properties have gone down, and you'll get maybe 1 or 2 developers that go in and buy up not 1 property, but buy up 4 or 5 in a row. And then it switches things over faster. But how do you put in any, I mean, because once they own the property, they can pretty much, like you said, put up whatever type of structure they have. Is there a method of dealing with that? Or do you say, hey, this is great, this is actually changing the neighborhood, this is encouraging people to come back in? I mean, that's kind of, it's kind of like, is that a philosophy you have? I mean, but it's just something that you could be aware of. Somebody could, let's say, walk into one of our older neighborhoods and buy up 3 or 4 homes in a row and then just start planting homes there, right? So
that's why the infill strategy that council has, supported is important so that we can have those conversations about where that strategic reinvestment can occur and how. Usually for something like that, you could come in, try to consolidate the lots, but, and then put an apartment building at the end of a standard street. But the zoning is still there for the lower density, single family or single detached unit that was there from before. They would actually have to come to council to ask for that change. And if you've got an infill strategy that says, okay, maybe that would be acceptable if it was on a corner lot on a road like Sturgeon Road. I don't want to presuppose, but on a major road that can handle the traffic, maybe that's okay. But having it further into the neighborhood on a local road might not be. It might be too impactful.
Would that infill also describe what would be permissible? So because you could all of a sudden take a larger lot, make 2 homes on it, put in a garden suite. So now all of a sudden now you got 3, maybe even 4 units on there. So I mean,
Or 6.
or 6. So your infill strategy would have to be alive to those possibilities.
Exactly.
Another thing that's happening, I can't find the graph right now, but the graph of kind of over time of like first-time home buyers is decreasing. Investment property investment is like skyrocketing. So we're having this like really messed up graph where people aren't owning, companies are owning. I don't know how you deal with that.
Yeah, planning and development doesn't get into home ownership. No, that's the one thing we don't do. We don't say if it's an apartment or a condo or is it an investment group that owns all of the units? But it is definitely.
But it
happening.
impacts communities.
For
Like, it
sure.
absolutely impacts like how you get to know your neighbors and
One of some of the biggest investment companies that are doing that are based in Canada.
In the US last year, I think I saw the statistic, it was like 30% of all new builds were bought by BlackRock, 2 other investment firms.
Yeah.
Huge. It drives all the prices up,
yeah.
makes them unaffordable.
Well, that's what
Beyond all these other things, like there's 50 factors making houses unaffordable, and that's a significant.
But it changes communities as well. I was chatting with a guy who owns in Blackford, and I guess it's mostly rentals in there, and it's more of a revolving door. It's not same neighbors for 40 years, which I know.
You're not creating a community anymore.
So this is the first check-in, just seeing how we're doing. We've droned at you for an hour now.
In relation to Councillor Jolly's comment, if you're allowing businesses to go in and do infill for profit, then you're essentially not helping anyone, the community or the new home buyers or anyone, if they're just in there for profit. Because if those homes were sold to people that
Greenfield is for profit too. Like everything's for profit.
Anybody to do it unless the government subsidizes it.
It's actually happening quite a lot in the greenfield context, more so than the infill.
But I don't, why do we have to push it in?
Control it so we do better.
Control usually means allowing more, is what everyone's saying.
No, not right. Just if it's happening, it's gotta be under these certain conditions and regulations.
Yeah, I think maybe we can circle back to the infill discussion, intensification, infill. Because it's a big, huge one. And from what we've seen so far, our pace of development infill wise is slow, but the impacts are significant. But let's circle back to that one maybe. Because it'll take a while to sort that one.
Do we have rules around land assembly like they do in Vancouver?
Consolidating lots for ownership.
Yeah.
Westmount.
Are you thinking of
When I
buying?
was like imagining.
Thinking of buying?
Well, I really like all of that. Actually, it was on my list.
Sign together that people want to sell.
It's super cheap. It's like.
just learning a bit about the Alberta planning system and having a bit of a chat with us. So she helped yesterday with the parking survey and learned all about the land use bylaws. So, cool. So welcome.
We were all wondering.
Good reporter. All right, so now we're going to talk about density for a little bit. I understand that that's kind of topic of interest for some of you. Before we get going, just does anybody want to make any wagers on densities of any neighborhoods in
You gave us these stats.
San Albert?
Ainsdale sucks. That's all I remember.
Which has more density, Deer Ridge or Lacombe Park?
Which is your ridge?
Whoa.
18 in Deer Ridge, 16 per hectare in Lacombe Park.
Either which make 40.
Yeah.
I don't, yeah.
Well, that's your clan and your clan. Yeah, you're just that density, you know.
Mission or Jensen Lakes?
Oh, I'd have
Which has
Say-
higher density?
High density.
to be,
Jensen Lakes, right?
I don't know.
Well, Mission has apartment buildings in it.
And seniors housing.
You're counting downtown?
So right now, the ASP is 38 dwelling units per hectare, but their build is at 24 units per hectare so far.
Jensen?
Jensen.
That's pretty good.
What's Mission?
Mission is at 28.
Mission's 28. That's pretty good.
So we'll get into this. I just
What's Pine View?
find you. It's also one of the lower ones.
Next on demolition.
I just want to know what I'm gonna get for my corner lot
Revitalization
when reforestation.
On that corner.
Yeah, I'm gonna put 2 houses on the corner.
You've heard a couple of the other neighborhoods. What's your guess for Pine View?
16.
Oh,
Very good.
you knew that.
40. I did, but I'm only like, we're just one kid family, so.
We only have one approved very full, Thoreau and Travis development.
Nouveau, under the 40?
Erin Ridge North is somewhere around 30.
But I think only 2 have been required to meet EMRB densities.
The new target, yeah. So we'll just talk a little bit about what is density, how it's measured, what it looks like, and why it matters. So, as the slide says, density is a ratio of built form to land area. It's a planning tool, so it helps us to influence growth and development. We also view it, it's a quantitative metric, so you can say, 28 units per hectare or 40 or whatever, just to give a sense of how those neighborhoods are developing. We use it as a performance measure, and it evolves over time based on a variety of factors. So we'll talk about that a little bit here. So when in the St. Albert context, we typically talk about it for the neighborhood, net residential development per hectare. So gross includes everything, net takes out all the roads, etc. There's also a concept of density of people or jobs per hectare, which we use in some circumstances, but you don't see that very much. Typically, when we're talking about residential development, we're just talking about dwelling units per hectare, but we do look at around the TOD sites. This concept of how many jobs per hectare is something that comes into play a little bit more, but we're focusing on residential development.
Put a basement suite in, is that 2 units or 1 unit? Basement suites.
We haven't been calculating it as 2. But that might be something, because there just hasn't been enough to really count it.
It also is kind of ephemeral sometimes. People put in a basement suite for a while and then it goes away. So it's the easier measure is just to count the principal structure. Yeah. But yeah, there is an amount, but
Right now, it's because of the amount we have, it's easy for us to count. We can count how many we have and know how much it's not really impacting. That's a good way to. Yeah, certainly a way to get more units.
and you'll see that in the land use bylaw. More secondary suites enabled. So we start with just the concept of the area. So 1 hectare, if I want to go to Brayside, Not quite a full block is basically a hectare, so Belmont Drive and Burns. Or if you want to go to downtown, I guess the west end of the 6 St. Anne parking lot there, and then the St. Thomas shops. That's basically 1 hectare or 2.471 acres. So we talk about this. This is again the ratio of built form to land area. There's 3 different examples here. So we've got a constant land area and then a variety of units. So 10 dwelling units per hectare is the top left, down to 60 dwelling units per hectare on the bottom right side of the scale. And again, most of what we're seeing in St. Albert, a lot of the neighborhoods are less than 30, more than 10. The new neighborhoods are supposed to meet 40 dwelling units per hectare. We'll talk a little bit first. So as I mentioned, when we measure density, we take out all of the roads, any parks, school sites, commercial areas, utility lots, etc., to get to the net residential. So we're only considering the developable land and then the amount of units on that developable land. That's our net density. And then gross would obviously then include everything, but we use net.
Can you go back 1 slide?
Yes.
Are we thinking at all about school site redevelopment in terms of having multi-use on school sites? It would, and I mean for the older ones, not the newer ones that have no space. Is that even?
So that's gonna be something we look at through the infill strategy.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, thank you.
I was gonna say, can we get a school site?
Oh, well, but like the ground clubhouse, why isn't it 4 stories with residential units on?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
For example.
Yeah, Father Jan will be a discussion at some point in time. Okay, so again, yeah, I think some of you, if not all of you, have seen some iteration of this, but we'll just again talk about the sliding scale of density. So again, on the left is your kind of standard suburban single family detached residential at 30 or less dwelling units per hectare, all the way to the right side of the scale, which is multi and multi that.
I'll just say that Riverbank Landing is kind of that 180-ish. As for density.
So again, this just talks to kind of site coverage. So we've got high rises that have low site coverage and the same density as a low rise with high site coverage or a medium rise with medium site coverage. So again, it's kind of like photography where you can kind of get there a number of different ways. You can change your depth of field, your aperture, etc. Same thing. You can get to a variety of different ways. And I think when we go back to when the EMRB growth plan got enacted, some council members here had a discussion about how do they want St. Albert to look? What are you willing to take and give to get there? Whether you're trying to encourage nodes of higher density to preserve larger areas of lower density, or whether you're willing to have that mix of different medium kind of types of density. Through Flourish, I know we've been talking a lot about targeting that missing middle, which we're still not seeing a lot of our developers. Some of them are starting to hit it now because it's so attractive, but up until maybe this year or last year, it seems like the first couple of years, it was still, the push was the single family residential and then a tower to balance out the densities. So many ways to get there. Yeah. Yes,
Give us an example where missing middle actually has come to fruition. Like, would that be in Riverside or where?
I think Riverside, some of their apartments are probably on the high end of middle. They've got like what are the townhouses there? I'm trying to think of.
I don't know their names, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There's the row houses like right by Costco, like just The Costco, they're very colorful.
Yeah,
Valencia on the park.
yeah, those come in somewhere around 40.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, even a townhouse, like we could talk about that, the individual types of product.
It really depends on the size and the form. I think the Mason and Groves are coming in around 35.
Mason and Grove is that one.
That's
that's
by
the one in
Riverside.
Riverside. Yeah.
Um,
So townhouse product is generally close to what that density target is for the city. And then you have to go to like walk-ups or better to go above that. Your zeros are coming in the upper 30s, mid 30s, somewhere in there. And then your standard single family is in the narrower lots now in the new development areas, you're
About 30.
30-ish, yeah, upper 20s, somewhere in there. So it's
There are a few examples of developers trying to get that missing middle bit, say, level of density.
Well, what you're seeing, and if you remember back to that first slide that Stephen showed with the different types of housing units that were coming on, and we saw from the apartments, they were still quite high. We weren't seeing, again, the townhousing, row housing product was still relatively a low percentage of the whole housing stock and even what's being brought on, but it is more than what we've had in the past. But that's I think where we would like to see a little bit more growth within the city, because we see that as a transition housing product so that it can get people grow with your house kind of idea. And we still don't have a lot of that. And that's the challenge facing a lot of Canadian municipalities. So we're not alone.
Right. But it's also a factor of density, but it's a bigger factor of affordability.
Absolutely.
It's easy. But we're actually not seeing affordability being more achievable. It's
And then,
for all of the reasons we talked about, whether they're houses being rental or whatever.
Don't they have to have more doors? So isn't that the argument that they, just sorry to interrupt.
No.
But
No.
isn't that what builders or developers say? They need more doors, so they have to go up higher to make it affordable or make it something profitable to build. Does that make the doors cheaper, or does that just make their profit line bigger?
yeah,
Yeah,
a little bit loaded,
Yeah.
but yeah.
yeah.
I think it's changing. When you look at our household incomes, and you see that to afford a row house or a townhouse, you need about $100,000 as a household income. That now is more, that's kind of that entry level, more affordable product for first time home buyers or even downsizing. There's challenges with downsizing and stairs, but it's important. It's an important mix when you're looking at what you want for your city.
Isn't the kind of walk-ups, medium rise, from what I understand, we're super restricted because of building codes regarding, exactly what I'm talking
I know
about.
what you're talking about.
Stairwells are kind of messed up in North America.
Yeah, so there's a whole notion, is that about here, or is that it's not just bikes, it's one of these.
Yeah, one of those.
There is a notion that the building code requirements limit the affordability of some of the buildings because you have to have adequate stairwells, and in North America, the requirements are greater than I think
Everywhere else.
Yeah, in other countries.
The other component too is, and I don't want to say, this is more an observation, it's not necessarily a factual statement, but it's kind of looking at the new townhouse development, and that's kind of replacing that old 2 or 3 story walk-up apartment. So you're not getting the 2 or 3 story walk-up, you're getting a block of townhousing instead, is kind of what it's
Like in Europe, where you have 3 apartments that go straight up. We just can't have that here because building codes.
That's at least part of the discussion. Yeah. So again, like in our context, the numbers wouldn't be right, but the top one is more of the Sidex, and then the middle is probably Nouveau, and then the bottom is probably some of the stuff that you're seeing in Riverside right now. So this is kind of a notion that there's a lot of concerns about density from a lot of, for a number of reasons. And one of those is just, what's it gonna look like? And this is just a little cul-de-sac and woodlands where if you look at it, if you don't pay too close of attention, you don't realize these are actually duplexes here.
I grew up on
So-
Walnut, Great Crescent.
It's just, this is real gentle density, the gentlest end of density. It's a little bit more than what you see. This is an example of where I'm from. So this is all pre-World War I housing here.
Don't look that old.
Because it's not. Actually, I lied to you. What this is actually a developer consolidated lots, just like we were talking about earlier. The house at, oops, let's see if I go. The houses to the left over here, these are still the pre-World War I houses. And then what the developer did is he came in, he bought basically a block face, made all of this townhouses, and then mimicked architecture of the block face and put a parkade underneath the whole thing. So when you drive past it, you don't, like, it really doesn't stand out that it's a big complex. But it's I don't know, like a 30-unit complex or something like that.
Wow.
So what we talk about is the greater your density, the more your design is gains importance. It's hugely important as you go up. So now we'll kind of get into the local examples of some of the neighborhoods. We already played that game a little bit, but just to kind of refresh ourselves. So again, here's the different neighborhoods. This is, I think, let's see, Oakmont. Yeah, this is post Botanica, but not with Riverbank Landing. So Oakmont went, well, we'll talk about that too. So Nouveau, Jensen Lakes, Erin Ridge North, these all have to be above, Shiro, they all have to be above 30 dwelling units per hectare. Built up?
Shiro has to be 40.
It's actually here. I'll just go to this. So yeah, the ASP for Shiro is 40. They're building at 29 so far. That's because they haven't done really any of their multi yet. Jensen, like we said, it's their ASP says 38. They're really at 24 right now. And Erin Ridge North is supposed to be 36 and they're building at 31 right now.
How much will densities in Kingsview and Pineview be impacted when it's fully built out? Like if they ever apply for ASP for those areas?
That's a good question. I don't think we've ever really run the numbers on it. I would think that it's still 20 or less.
Yeah, it's still.
Those are big lots,
Yeah.
big lots, big houses, and it's all, there is a multifamily area, but I don't know that the numbers
I
are.
think the multi-family area is still very low. Like, I think it's one of those that it says it's multi-family, but it's more like either duplex or semi-detached instead of actually apartment style.
Thank you.
Did you see that's post, Riverbank? So
Yeah, so I actually have see if there's a slide here that shows the numbers of it. Because we actually did the numbers with, that was post Botanica, but not post Riverbank Landing. We've got the numbers for Riverbank Landing as well. So again, South Riel, it's a little bit different type of a style of development that will come in around 81. Based on their ASP. Downtown is 140. Ville is coming in at 130 now, something like that. So again, this is just for context to kind of understand where density is and how it looks to you kind of when you see it. And then here's a more germane example. So this is Northridge, Norwood Close. 23 dwelling units per hectare. So this is kind of newish, kind of standard development for single detached. And then we go to Erin Ridge Drive, or Everett Drive and Erin Ridge, again, same thing. So you're seeing that 24 dwelling units per hectare, just kind of all the standard single family development. Joyal Way, this is townhousing. So again, when you get to townhousing, you get closer to that 40 number. Mason and Grove, 35. South Rio Midtown, so they're at 40 with their town housing. Oakmont, they're at 41. Water's Edge, Narren Ridge North, that's a apartment complex that's 95, so now you're starting to get into that higher end of things, so it balances out some of the low end. Botanica, as Christina said, 193 dwelling units per hectare. So I think Oakmont was, we'll still get there, good. Yeah. So before Botanica it was 18, with Botanica it moved to 21, and then with Riverbank Landing, it'll actually bump that whole neighborhood up to 25 on like a.
Still.
No, but on a 10-acre parcel, really, like, and then if you look at the assessment value that you get off of that chunk, like it's.
What's FIA for Riverbank?
Yeah,
we
we will
don't-
get into that.
We don't have the, do we have everything?
Yeah.
We do, okay, yeah. Cool. Yeah, we've got a few FIAs for you
Do
to,
you? Okay.
yeah, you'll be able to sink your teeth into it. So again, density is not design. Density and design are two different things. Design is really important as you get more dense. We talked about ensuring connectivity, walkability, variety. I think we've talked about this in the past, and it runs through all scopes of housing. Like, we really want to create opportunities for people to start their lives and then progress in their lives and then downsize in their lives in the same community without having to leave. And right now, I think, we're getting a little bit better, but for a while we were pretty homogenous in some of our product types. So that's why we keep pushing for like that missing middle kind of piece. In particular, we want to make sure that we've got parks, amenity space, landscaping, etc., all nearby, and then as much quality as we can encourage and or require, depending.
The housing variety is that. I really struggle that we're not kind of looking at rental versus ownership. I was chatting with some seniors who would love to downsize out of their houses, but they can't afford it. So their $500,000 house, if they went into a, $450,000 unit that's actually accessible, they can't afford the $800 a month in condo fee. Their house is paid off. So I really struggle that we're not considering that in developing in growth. Because people are stuck in their homes because they can't afford to move into the condo.
Yeah, I think there are people that are kind of house rich, cash poor right now.
And have no options.
That's true.
It's a challenge. It's part of the legislation within Alberta that limits our scope to what we can consider in planning and development.
Advocacy.
As we get into the housing discussion, not today, but the bigger broad picture housing discussion, I think that we'll probably touch on that as well. We are a little bit limited. So this is an example of a planned community not so far away. Anybody know? Can you read? It's about. Yeah.
Statue in the middle.
So this was the advantage of this one. It was Canada Lands that developed this. So Crown Corporation was able to do it. They had a huge amount of land that they were able to work with, planned out everything. It's got a modified grid, which means that the neighborhood is fairly interconnected, which encourages walking, transit, etc. So the walk score in this neighborhood is 76 in Griesbach. And just as an example, Erin Ridge North is, anybody want to guess? The walk score? Walk score, not the density, the walk score. Griesbach 76.
29.
30, it's 30. Yeah. Erin Ridge North is 30. So again, it's just, and it was intended to be that way. So it's a little bit different kind of a scope, but
It's not a really fair comparison.
Yeah. But it's a comparison. It just shows that there can be things done. It probably just depends on what you're.
They're both new greenfield developments, right? So the person that's looking at perhaps buying in Erin Ridge North might also consider this community as well. So
It's funny how walk score is a term that everybody understands and doesn't get upset about, but 15-minute cities people live in. It's the same thing.
They're the same, very similar concept, yes. Different, two different ways to measure the same. Yeah, so again, as we talk about it, even when you get down to architecture, we want to talk about having a variety of different forms, and then you know, the actual details of the buildings themselves, and higher quality buildings, higher quality architecture, understandably that adds to costs. But I guess if you wanted to go with the pure efficiency model, you could go look in some of the Soviet bloc countries and you could see that too. So it's maybe less inspiring forms of a built environment.
Aaron spent a lot of times in those buildings. He doesn't want it here.
Very efficient, very efficient. No, so it's just finding that balance, again, finding those opportunities to strike that right balance.
You can public question that top right one, just so you know.
What's that?
That was on a day
Been
where
a smoky day.
Yeah, it's like.
Yeah, you can tell.
It looks like a forest fire, yeah. So again, just kind of talking about this development, high amenities, so a lot of parks, public amenity, open spaces. There's military history and dedications incorporated. They've got a lake, etc. So again, this is one interesting point. So our standard municipal reserve is 10% right now, and council's heard about that a lot lately with the school boards. Griesbach ended up being close to 20% when they included the lake and the green space there. So they went significantly higher, and then they specifically encouraged some of the retention of their the on-site trees in their area. They added this community garden as a community focal point. So again, when we talk with our residents about what they like about St. Albert, like predictably 1 and 2 are trees or parks, and you can interchange those two. And it's as we get more dense, that also gets more important. It's trying to figure out how you make sure that people have access to those and that those are being accommodated for.
Even with comparing it to Griesbach, and that Canada Lands own the land, could a developer have afforded to buy a similar sized chunk of greenfield land and do what they did in Griesbach? Would it have been economically viable if it was on a commercial basis, as opposed to we own the land because it's an old military base?
I don't know what I can tell you, because I don't know what their pro forma would be. I don't know if they had to
Find out.
What's that?
We can find out. We have it in there.
Oh, yeah, we do.
No, it's just, it just sometimes the uniqueness is because they had a financial.
There's an advantage there for sure.
Yeah.
Like just the fact that that land was all consolidated is huge advantage. Yeah, we can do some digging on that question. And then this slide is again, just as I've been harping on it, as density increases, the intention to design also needs to increase, and probably I would say almost disproportionately more so. As you get more dense, that you really need to start paying attention to it, or you can create some kind of real marginal product. I talk about it a lot. I think I also, as you saw in that slide, there are multiple ways to go about it. So I don't want to say that going high is the ultimate solution, just because it's maybe it's the most easy to visualize. Again, there's a whole slew of discussion around environmental psychology that we don't have time to unpack here. But once you go up above 8 stories, there's a lot of things to consider there. 8 or 10 stories, somewhere in that. There's questions about carbon footprints and sustainability of large concrete buildings, high rises, etc. I know I grew up in a community that had a maximum building height of 10 to 12 stories, depending on where it was. And that was to preserve views of the Capitol building. And when people go there, like a lot of people go and they're they remark about the scale of the development, especially in that downtown area, and how much more fitting it is to kind of a human scale. It's really like unprovoked kind of lay people that don't know anything about development say this feels like different. There's a totally different feel, and if you travel around, this gets to that question that I asked. Barcelona, Paris, Vienna. There's a number of cities that, if you actually look at what the built environment is in the kind of tourist areas, 3 stories, 4 stories, maybe 5 stories. I think Paris is maxed out at 4 for most of their core city. So
Yeah, but they're going underground and ruining the water table now.
that happens everywhere. I mean, anyway, there's lots.
So in really dense cities like that, they can't build up, so they're building down, like way down, and it's like just messing with the water table.
So putting apartments underground?
You know, like ultra rich people are like building like ballrooms and swimming pools and whatever else they can't go up.
So the whole concept is there's a variety of approaches. It doesn't have to be just right to towers. There's a lot of opportunities in between. So building massing and scale, that human scale is kind of important. The use of podiums to set back, that helps to kind of convey a different scale. If you just run a straight 10-story building right up to the sidewalk, the feel is different than if you have a 2-story podium and then you have 8 stories above the podium, because people can't actually see a lot of it sometimes. Again, building articulation, architectural quality, materials, etc., amenity spaces, landscaping, all of that becomes more important the more dense you get. So this is time to re-jog our brains again. So just I guess out of curiosity, for those folks that identified a place in their mind where they wanted to travel, or a city that they enjoyed, just curious to hear what they are, and then maybe we'll just go around. So, Councillor Jolly, do you want to start?
Sure. So I threw out actually 3 kind of cities neighborhoods. The first was Christchurch, where I lived. So I lived right outside of downtown Christchurch for a couple of years. I walked downtown to work every day. It was about a 20-minute walk. It was amazing. I didn't drive. I drove on the weekends. I never drove during the day. I also put actually Westmount and Oliver. So Westmount was actually on my list of like communities that just absolutely I love. And then Copenhagen, because Copenhagen. For the same reasons. Yeah, it's super walkable. Lots of events happening. So festivals, markets, music, kind of all that stuff happening, walkable, like local restaurants and cafes. Like I love Westmount and Oliver because you can go walk to 10 different restaurants that have good food that aren't Boston pizza. Not that Boston pizza is great, but when that's the only thing you have access to, it's not great. So yeah, being walkable, having access to parks, all of those have really great access to parks and trees. The massive park just outside of downtown Christchurch, we were in there all the time. So great for sitting and listening to the birds. Same thing, Oliver downtown, there's tons of park space access to that. Same as Westmount, lots of really great access to parks. And kind of the comment I made is all 3 of those have narrow roads and terrible parking. But that's okay. That makes, we were having a conversation, that means people drive slower. It means my kids are safer. So I'm okay with that. So.
And I should have said there is no wrong answer to this. It's just more of a discussion about what things are interesting to you or what things are attractive to you. Councillor Broadhead, did you identify anything?
Yeah, I put 5 down actually.
Wow.
And many of the reasons are the same. So Lyon, Paris, Calgary, a little village in Italy called Montisi, and a little suburb in Minnesota called Zumbrota.
Oh.
And all of them are vibrant. They've got history to them. There's some things I hate about each one of them, but they, like Calgary, as much as we love to hate Calgary, To me, and I wrote down, they seem to have a sense of manifest destiny down there. They can take on the world and beat it. And that's what I love about the place. And I like what they've done along their river. So there's a lot better river walks around, but I mean, Calgary is put in some work. It's kind of nice. Industry, as I'm proud, I said is the St. Albert of Southeast Minnesota. It's beautiful there.
Yeah, it is.
But it's a suburb as well of Rochester, and they're just they're busy going around their work there, and it's a safe, beautiful community. Those are the 5 I put up. Oh, and if you want to talk about Mantizi, the day we got there, the entire village was having supper together. How cool is that?
Neighborhood block party expansion.
Yeah, exactly. So,
3 dogs. Councilor Bieransky?
Tough one. I mean, there's lots of beautiful places to visit, but I think we often forget about how spoiled we are to live where we live. There's many people that are very envious of St. Albert, our trails, our parks, our community, our everything. And what I do like about St. Albert is it's not too busy. You know, when you don't want to be in a crowd, you don't have to be. In flexible corners, you can go and have quiet or watch birds or do whatever you want to do too. So I just have to savor what we have, because I'll visit anywhere, but we're spoiled. Yeah.
I've never been to Copenhagen. It's on my list for sure. I agree with Wes. We just spent some time down in Calgary and it was pretty walkable. Stevens Ave is amazing. But I was down there for Stampede last year and I couldn't get a hotel, so I was on the outskirts, but the transit system got me like, so any community that has really good transit, which is why I loved Singapore. Dora and I took transit everywhere when we were there, underground or above ground. It was just fantastic. So I would have said Saskatoon a while ago because I went to FCM there in 2013, but I was there last year and it's gone downhill a bit. But their downtown is kind of cute and quaint. They've got lots of focus on art and
Yeah, all your market downtown.
yeah, exactly. So St. Augustine in the United States, it has a bylaw that says no chain restaurants can set up shop in that city. So every restaurant and store is individually owned, which I think is very cool. I don't know to get out here, but it's a pretty cool place to visit. And it's the oldest community in North America, so it's got a lot of history that they've preserved. So
I don't really have a town, but I can tell you what I like and don't like. I like quiet. I don't like road noise. Like if you can go to a place and you don't face the road noise somehow, that's relaxing. It's like Natalie said, like you can hear the birds. But when all you hear is the freeway or whatever's coming on, that is great stress. So the other thing is traffic. And I know you can say you need transit, but let's just be real, no one wants to do it. They'll do it maybe to go to work or go to a specific, but you're not taking your child with a hockey bag onto transit. It's just not going to happen. So the idea that you're not going to need a car is not realistic. But that being said, every time we keep moving this density, we keep making the traffic worse and worse and worse. So you can go to some place in Victoria. As what the other thing we have is it has greenery. So we have the greenery here when we can. Victoria has the greenery, which because it rains for a bit, 8 months a year. And so, but they also are developing wicked traffic down there, which just then offsets it, right? So I guess, and they also in Victoria, they have more of a standard where they kind of expect to have more flowers out and that sort of thing, again, more of the year because you have that growing ability. But having that kind of an atmosphere is great. The challenge I see is every time you make those quaint, cute places, which I also, everyone likes them, but the prices just jack up every time you go into one of those stores. So it's like something at coffee's $12, you know, where you're like, it's just like mediocre cuteness. You might get it for a reasonable price, but you pay for that extra like wood rocket or something. So that's the challenge, is that when we do that, so suddenly the affordability to actually enjoy the spaces goes down. But if it can somehow, which you can't control the prices, but that's kind of the thing, is when you have that architecture where you feel like this is really like I'm in another world, like I'm on a mountain landscape type of thing. When in Switzerland, you have that type of landscape, like Red Creek has that downtown. They also have very expensive properties, but they have that architecture. So then you want to be down there. I think one of our biggest challenges for walkability is that we live in winter, except for like on Thursday, and we'll have summer, but the rest of the year we have winter. And so like the walkability of being able to go from like place to place becomes a lot less desirable at -20. Like I look at Grant McEwen, and once you go into Grant McEwen, you can go to the whole university from one to the other, and you don't have to brave the outdoors, right? So then you actually have the ability, like if you had this beyond a Grant McEwen setting, where if you have those pedways like we have downtown, so that in the event that you were to go there, you could actually explore the entire area as a standard, as opposed to saying we're going to go and then we go and move, because the odds are you're just not going to go at all, because it's just going to be a deterrent for many people. So I guess those are kind of the elements that I see that are good, that, you know, I guess one of the things we look at is the challenges that we have within our climate here. We just keep saying, just embrace the outdoors. And for people who don't want to embrace winter, it just makes it that there's no alternative for them to actually figure out how to get around as much. So that's kind of, so that's, but quiet, no traffic. Like we have to have some, but like if you asked me, I was going to say before, as I thought, St. Albert 1985. That is what I love. Because we had some conveniences. McDonald's had finally moved in, which was a big day on campus in 1977. You didn't have to go into Edmonton, but you had some conveniences coming in. You had really nice development, and you still had the ability to walk or bike without thinking you're going to take your life in your hands in some roads. And you still had that quaintness coming in. You know, like when you go down St. Winston Churchill and you smell those railway ties going down after the pool, going to downtown, like that's iconic to me. Every time I smell it, I'm like, yep, I'm still in 19. So that's kind of what I love. That's it. I'll stop talking.
Thank you. Councilor Kerr?
I had a couple too, and in respect of our guest here, actually had my very first one was Dublin. But maybe that's because of Guinness beer, I don't know. But certainly when we were there, it was very walkable, lots of little shops, mix of old and new. The scale felt right, had great transit, you know, to get around on either the train in and out of town, or local in town. All of those things, it felt like a cool vibe to it. Like there little pubs, everything was on a smaller scale almost. Like there were smaller grocery stores, smaller bars, you know, smaller, every little corner had a place you could go in and get your hair done, or so they were still, it didn't seem to have been taken over by the big mega chains. And I would almost say the same thing about Seville and Amsterdam. Amsterdam was more of a bike kind of place, not a walking as much, but even though it was all broken up by the canals and river systems, it still seemed you could, within those blocks, they were, hate to use the term, but they had a great walk score, or they had a 15-minute city within, segmented by all the canals and rivers and things. When I look at Strasbourg, I was surprised that they had decentralized their universities, and they had made these little micro campuses, so that rather than having like a big, huge campus, they had a whole bunch of smaller ones spread out through the city. And I think they did the same thing with their big hospital when they rebuilt it. They actually decentralized their big major hospital to have kind of like micro hospitals around around the town, and all their government offices were mandated to be decentralized as well. So they didn't have like a big, huge city hall, for example. They actually had planning department in one part of town and engineering in another part of town and what have you. So they took steps to almost decentralize things into kind of like spreading the wealth around almost. And it made it, instead of having like a big downtown core, kind of spread all of that wealth and development and jobs and restaurants into these little micro kind of communities, which was kind of cool.
So I guess the take home question, not for now, but based on those communities that you were thinking of, and Councilor Bermansky, you get the easy one here. But are there things that you think could be applied to the St. Albert context for how we're building? So just something to mull over. How are we doing? Do we need another break? Do you need to get up and shake a leg or walk around a little bit? Yeah.
Something, I just looked up the real estate prices in Grease Spa there, and the average single family home is $900,000, a 600 square foot walk up, 300,000, condos, 400,000. Those old army barracks they converted, they're over $400,000 too. So I mean that's why houses are selling so quick in St. Albert now. A lot of people that are looking in that area just kind of come a little bit further and they're, oh, houses are cheap in St. Albert by standards of that area.
Our median single family is over 6.
Oh, I thought it was closer to 7.
Yeah, it's 660 or something like that here.
Talking about the new housing inventory.
Yeah, the new
Resale.
Sale price, not, yeah. Sale price is median is new is over 660. And the zeros, those are averaging around 550 to 560-ish, somewhere in that ballpark.
Our
So-
semis are around the same, around 500.
Prices are like, it's a little bit, maybe it's a little bit higher, but prices are just high
High.
for housing. It's a struggle.
Trying to sell my house right now.
So, to
5-minute break.
5 minutes? Give you a light at the end of the tunnel here.
We talk about.
We're gonna talk next about outward growth. So I'll turn it over to Christina.
So I've got this, I have the pleasure of now trying to like bridge the gap between intensification, density, and outward growth. And I guess I'll just try to do that off the fly here, but the density kind of component, it happens within intensification and it happens equally in greenfield. It's a bridging factor. It's something that we have to consider. And it's increasing density and intensification on any kind of lot, whether it's greenfield or infill, does have a net financial gain for the city. It's efficient. So now I'm going to talk about outward growth and how the role it plays within the development and the growth strategy for St. Albert. Right, my slides are a little bit different. So try to find my spot in it. No. Okay, I see. All right. The annexation document found that the pre-annexation footprint of St. Albert contained a 26-year land supply for residential growth. And that, again, remember, assumed the higher than average growth rate for the city. Based upon St. Albert's growth rate for the last 20, over the last 20 years at that one, which is more in keeping with Flourish, that the already approved area structure plans of Churro, Northridge, South Riel, Kingswood, Jensen Lakes, and Aaron Ridge North, plus in combination with our infill growth targets, that the city already had approved plans to accommodate approximately 35,000 people. So that means that any plan that comes on subsequent to that is adding to the 35,000. So in theory, at that stage, you're outside of the scope of Flourish. But with the annexation lands brought on board and with our growth rates, assumed growth rates, now our land supply exceeds 50 years. So as stated, next slide, Adrian. Next slide. As stated, St. Albert already has a significant amount of planned growth accommodated within its borders, and Flourish points that St. Albert will focus most of its outward residential growth within existing area structure plans. This will be accompanied by employment west of Ray Gibbon Drive, primarily in the Lakeview Business District. Landowners may propose incremental residential and non-residential growth at the northern edges of the city beyond the area structure plans. But these proposals will be considered on a case-by-case basis in light of the growth strategy policies. And that's a direct quote from Flourish. So the next slide, that's right, thank you. Within the outward growth section, there is a prioritization for the city to grow west. And the reason is few kind of components of this, that significant provincial and municipal investments were planned for Ray Gibbon Drive. Planning growth on both sides of this road will help optimize investments and also reduce pressure on St. Albert Trail. The city has also identified that the community amenity sites will be located in this area, and it will have the adjacent residential community to support that investment. In addition, there is significant environmental and recreation assets on the west side. so that, which will create a citywide recreation amenity. As a city has invested significant infrastructure dollars to prioritize and advance development to the west, it meant that we've brought servicing across Ray Gibbon Drive, got the amenity site. There's an opportunity for a new high school site along with the elementary school. You've got the investments within the new employment district for the city, and it helps with the residential community. Growing West also builds upon past infrastructure investments such as Fire Hall 3. You don't need another fire hall to grow west. And the whole idea of adding to Ray Gibbon Drive. And so this is why the MDP or Flourish demonstrates its commitment to growing west. Slide, Adrian. However, it must be stated that while the MDP didn't restrict development into areas of growth, it didn't prioritize them. There is no statement within the MDP that suggests that the city will upfront or explore cost sharing agreements for developments outside of growing west. You may be asking, well, why? It goes back to the annexation document. To ensure that tax levies and the growth is fiscally sustainable, future growth within the city was divided into 3 servicing basins. The newly annexed land was identified as being prioritized after the remaining lands within the city were developed. So after about 25 years of growth. While it is important that the city plan for the future, we are so we can be ready to bring on new greenfield growth once the existing land base is gone. There is no need to bring it on sooner. In fact, bringing on too much land too quickly will have economic implications on the city, both financially and also spreading out the growth across many areas, increasing the amount of supportive infrastructure and the associated services. What is likely to have, what we likely have to take into consideration based on discussion today is that we need to focus the higher priority greenfield areas, but defer investment for future years in the priority areas to ensure that we have the resources available to balance our investment in redevelopment and infill. We do want to grow to ensure that it is not only new development and leaving no dollars at the expense of ignoring those mature areas. Doesn't make sense, but hopefully you get the gist.
So if somebody was in the annex area and they wanted to develop sooner, could they, or are we gonna be like meaning?
So the MDP doesn't restrict them because we didn't write a restrictive policy. It was about vision, but there's less supportive services for it. So he did talk about prioritizing to the west with infrastructure investments, prioritizing that from a city perspective and saying, you want to bring this on, you bring it on yourself.
And that's where we'll talk about later in the financial implications, the risk of not wanting to go outside of those high priority areas, especially the greenfield, because there is so many costs that are associated with that. So it's that balance of outward inward growth and the economic and financial implications of balancing it.
But I think like Riverside had like, they trucked out all their waste, like how many years? Like they had temporary servicing basically for quite some time before it actually got them. Right, so am I wrong? I don't think.
It wouldn't have been that long. I think when we built Project 8. So I think they were already underway. Was it 9?
Like we did the order.
Sorry, yeah, 9. So when we built Project 9, we figured out that there was a pipe problem after they had already started building. So they did do in-pipe storage and trucking for that 2-year, 3-year window. So it was basically, we enabled them to go forward once we approved the funding for the project and we knew that there was, again, light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. So it wasn't like we just enabled them to build in-pipe storage, it was because we identified that there was a pipe capacity issue, and then that we had created a solution to it that was going to take about 2 years or 2.5 years to construct.
So I entitled this map Beyond the Scope of Flourish. So anything, the colored areas is beyond the scope of Flourish. And its goal of achieving 100,000 people and 13,000 jobs. Based upon the servicing study of the newly annexed lands, you can see that lands north of St. Albert Trail are identified in the next stages of growth past Flourish. Then the lands west of St. Albert Trail and finally west of Carrot Creek, all north of in the newly annexed areas. Bringing on each of these basins will enable a total of 45 to 50 years of growth, or approximately 15 years each, and the associated infrastructure and municipal service provision costs as well. So what do we do with that knowledge? Something that is highlighted in the videos is that the whole costs of investment are not always accurately captured or understood. The entire cost of the city of the project or the development might not be initially clear. These costs can include underground pipes, the cost of land that we had to buy to enable the infrastructure or utility work, the road to build of the new areas, and the buses to get to those areas, the graders to pick up the snow, the drivers to operate these vehicles. This does not factor in the increase need for fire, police, IT financing, or planning to accommodate this new population. Those are the actual costs that are added as we grow. What we need to do is evaluate when and where is the right place to invest, as the initial investment triggers all of these additional costs. So we need to ensure that we don't expand too quickly as to keep St. Albert both physically and financially sustainable. We need to understand the true impacts of our asks to council and look at it from a broader lens. So new distribution warehouse developments are not going to be constructed in downtown St. Albert, nor will all the residential growth. As per Flourish, 70 to 80% of all growth is allocated within the greenfield areas. And this land is required for development. It is important to understand that new development choices contribute to the economic sustainability of St. Albert. However, they do come at a cost to the city. Recently, administration modeled growth scenarios for Lakeview Business District, including tax revenue and embedded infrastructure costs to the city. Should this same lens turn to each development, it would ease in meeting Flourish's principles. Flourish challenges administration to understand and balance the full cost of greenfield development for things like as part of resilient infrastructure, housing options, sustainable growth, and mobility choices. You need to be strategic, intentional, and focused. St. Albert is required to forecast its development costs today and the repair, maintain, and replace costs for the future. And so now we're kind of going into the financial considerations, and as much as I can speak to this again, there's another fantastic video that does it much more eloquently. So.
I've seen this one.
Yeah.
This is the city of Lafayette, Louisiana. It's a pretty typical mid-sized American city. Like most American cities, it has that one nice old building that didn't get bulldozed in the 60s. And like most American cities, it's broke. It's full of aging infrastructure in desperate need of repair and not enough money to maintain it. But unlike most American cities, Lafayette acknowledged this fact and requested the help of Strong Towns and Urban 3, a consulting company that helps cities better understand the economic impact of development. Their analysis in Lafayette uncovered a harsh reality that should be a wake-up call to every municipality in North America, as well as any city emulating the American car-centric style of development. But let's back up a bit. In a previous video in this series, we discussed how two identical lots in the same city have very different property tax revenue. In this example, a 100-year-old commercial block built in the traditional style of development drastically outperformed a shiny new development created in the modern car-centric style. But despite the differences in revenue, both blocks have the same cost to the city to maintain their infrastructure. So by bulldozing an old block of shops to build this car-centric second-rate taco joint, the city was destroying its wealth. This example alone should be enough to convince anyone that the modern car-centric suburban style of development is broken, but it's worth exploring this further. Does this hold up in other cities? And what happens when we bring into account the cost of servicing these properties with roads, water pipes, sewers, etc.? And that brings us back to Lafayette. This is a map of the revenue and expenses data uncovered by Urban 3. So what are we looking at? Well, any successful business tracks its ROI, its return on investment. When making a decision between two competing projects, it's critical to know which one will result in the most revenue compared to the investment put into it. And too many projects with a negative return on investment could bankrupt a company. But in order to know your ROI, you need to know two things: your revenue and your expenses. Urban 3 created a kind of municipal return on investment for Lafayette. This map shows the municipal revenue per acre. So why per acre other than the fact that Americans can't use metric? Well, every property in a city needs services, and the majority of services get more expensive the more spread out they are. Roads are the obvious example. The farther a parcel of land is from everything else, the more asphalt is needed to get there. The worst case scenario are cul-de-sac, which are basically just city-subsidized driveways. This also applies to water infrastructure, sewers, and all other physical infrastructure, as well as the cost of policing, fire department coverage, and even the cost of providing education. But while per area revenue is actually quite a good approximation, Urban 3 wanted to fully understand these expenses, so they painstakingly calculated the cost of services for each parcel of land in Lafayette. It looks something like this. This shows every area that's a net positive for the city in gray, and every area that's a net negative in red. And here it is in 3D. This analysis has some fascinating results. The first is that downtown is wildly profitable. This is a bit surprising because there's nothing particularly remarkable about downtown Lafayette. It's certainly not bad, but you'd never know from looking at these pictures that this is the economic engine of the city, while places like this are a drain on city finances. But this shouldn't be too surprising when you think about it, because there's an insane amount of asphalt and infrastructure here for a very small number of shops. And for some bizarre reason, the Google Street View car drove down every aisle of this parking lot. But since they did it over multiple years, you can move down this way and watch the Toys R Us go out of business. Most of these profitable gray areas are the historical neighborhoods built along the river. But one of the biggest spikes is this place, a modern mixed-use walkable neighborhood called River Ranch. Places like this are a net positive for the city. One of the most shocking discoveries that Strongtowns discovered is that the replacement cost of all of the infrastructure in Lafayette, something that you would expect to happen over about one generation, was about $32 billion. And that's just infrastructure, not all the other everyday costs needed to run a city. Yet the existing tax base was much smaller than that. In order to bridge the difference, Strongtowns calculated that the average family in Lafayette would see their tax bill go from about $1,500 per year to $9,200 per year. But the median household income in Lafayette was only $41,000 at the time. There's simply no way that can happen. But those simple averages are hiding the bigger picture of who's subsidizing who. Because these gray sections are the poorer areas, while these red areas are significantly wealthier. So here's a fun quiz. Which of these two neighborhoods is subsidizing the other, number 1 or number 2? Yeah, it's the first one that's subsidizing the second. The poorest people in Lafayette are consistently subsidizing wealthy suburbanites. But I don't want to pick on Lafayette here. As I said at the beginning, there's nothing particularly unique about Lafayette, and these results are typical for most American cities. Well, I guess in Lafayette, the suburban sprawl is built on former wetlands, which results in unusually high costs for stormwater management, but otherwise, it's pretty typical. So let's look at another city that's not literally built on a swamp, Eugene, Oregon. Here's the Urban 3 map of taxable value per acre. Once again, downtown is clearly visible. And here's the 3D map of revenue compared to expenses. It's still obvious where downtown is, but you might be wondering about this little bump over here. This is Crescent Village, a modern mixed-use development, because once again, these kinds of mixed-use walkable neighborhoods financially outperform car-dependent suburbia every single time. By the way, here's what that 3D map of Eugene looks like from below. The red spikes correspond almost perfectly to modern car-centric suburban developments, a visual reminder that car-dependent suburbia is being subsidized by productive urban places. The data from Urban 3 makes the subsidies visible, and it makes it very clear who's subsidizing who. In Eugene, Urban 3 analyzed 9 categories of development: residential, mixed-use, and commercial in low, medium, and high density. And here's what the average revenue for the city looked like after taking into account the servicing of these properties. In the case of Eugene, the low-density suburban housing is being subsidized by everything else. People may look at this and say, but I want to live in a low-density single-family home, and that's fine, but only if you're also willing to pay for it. But there's a bigger problem. This is what the land use map looks like for Eugene, Oregon. The majority of land is zoned exclusively for single-family residential, which means that the majority of properties in the city are a net negative to city finances. And this is a pretty typical result for an American city. When you see results like this, is there any surprise that American cities are broke? Here's the tax revenue per acre for South Bend, Indiana. See if you can spot downtown. Or here in Charleston, South Carolina. Or in St. Paul, Minnesota. And here's the entire state of New Hampshire, with all of the traditional downtown neighborhoods clearly visible. In every case, in every region Urban 3 is analyzed, traditional mixed-use walkable neighborhoods dramatically outperform car-centric suburbia. But in North America, we've made it difficult or even impossible to build new neighborhoods this way because of modern zoning and other car-centric regulations. Of course, these mathematics apply outside of America as well. Here's a map of Auckland, New Zealand. You can clearly see the increased city revenue along transit lines. And you need to zoom out significantly to see downtown because it is so financially productive. So what do we do with this information? Well, our cities, through their policies, can decide what kind of developments they encourage. The city of Guelph in Ontario, Canada, not far from my hometown, is an excellent example. In 2013, Guelph needed more room, and like all Canadian cities, they were considering expanding their borders and sprawling. But after running this kind of ROI analysis, they decided to focus on infill developments by making it cheaper and easier for developers to create buildings that encourage walkable neighborhoods, like this one. Here's what the revenue per hectare because Canada looked like for Guelph in 2013. Not bad. In general, Canadian cities are better with their finances than American cities. But here it is in 2016 and in 2019. This is what a financially solvent city looks like. So which path will the financially struggling American cities choose for their future? They can decide to make it easy to build mixed-use walkable neighborhoods, making good use of land and encouraging walking, cycling, and public transit. Or they can build more of this garbage and go bankrupt. Seems like a pretty easy decision to me. I'd like to thank my supporters on Patreon who pay me to mathematically annihilate the suburbs in 3D. If you like this kind of content, check out Strong Towns and Urban 3. And if you really like this kind of video, visit patreon.com/notjustbikes.
I've seen that a few times, it's awesome. Before we go any further, can we get a heat map of that, like similar to that? Is that a program that you can, or do you have to hire?
No, the planning techs have been mapping it, they just didn't quite get it finished for this, but
So we could.
we've got some neighborhoods that we're trying to map out on a value per area. basis, and I've asked them to try to do a 3D map of the same. So as soon as we get that, we'll share it with the council.
And when we're council, we are debating area structure plans and we get the FIA. That's what we're seeing essentially, right? The financial.
Yeah, that's a visualized FIA basically. Yep.
So my second last question is, Bill 20 said that we don't need to ask for non-statutory studies. Is an FIA something that is required?
So, within, there are policies within it, so it's the statutory document that identifies things like FIAs. So I don't know the full regulations and how Bill 20 is gonna be enacted, but we feel like because it's listed as something within statutory document, that we should be okay.
I feel that came from the development community. Yeah. From Build Alberta saying we don't want to pay for these FIAs or other studies anymore. So don't allow the municipalities to force us. But my last question is going to be. Anyway, I need the FIA to make these decisions. So I think probably without them, I'd be hesitant to approve something because I don't know the impact.
So our FIAs, the way they're written right now, are more for the neighborhood plan level, so
Okay.
they're gonna be approving area structure plans. But we're gonna go through and talk about the FIAs in a bit, but I think Daria's got some questions for you all.
Okay, and my last question, I thought that was second last, and we can answer it very end. But this is where Bill and I have started talking about this whole workshop is. If we can get a really impactful FIA from mixed use, from Riverbank landings, from Sidex development, from downtown development, why are we chasing non-residential?
Well, that's a real question,
Yeah.
for sure.
And spending all this money to develop Lakeview.
Yeah, and we have
Probably be solvent and sustainable with 100% residential because we do it so well, right?
we have a few slides that get into the ROI on those.
And we can wait
We'll
that
get
as a
into-
philosophical
Yeah.
question.
But I think it's important to remember that you are trying to create complete community
jobs.
that enable those people to live, work and play in this.
I'm gonna get outside my lane, but I think if you think of St. Albert's an ecosystem, right? You need a little bit of everything. Yeah, at the end of the day, and that balance is achieved to make you a sustainable, financially sustainable, but a sustainable capital S community, I think, is that you've got a little bit of everything in it. It's deliberately developed to that end. I don't know if I said it yet.
That is.
Yeah, I think-
Message.
I think that, I don't remember which, well, a number of you were talking about kind of being self-sustainable or independent. And in the notion of that is kind of, it was discussed during, is that, what, 60% of the workers in St. Albert, or the people that live in St. Albert work in Edmonton.
Used to be
And-
70s.
And the idea was that we wanted to create a more complete community. And then we wouldn't have to build the road infrastructure that we needed to get people in and out and all those kind of things. We could do, create meaningful employment here and have less commuting and all that kind of stuff. So,
It reduces your impact of servicing
Yeah.
and your servicing needs to that.
Yeah, but I visual these things.
But there is-
that a residential or is non-res?
Yeah.
Mixed use both.
you'll see the slide. There's some real numbers.
So for this one, as we were preparing for this presentation and in general, as people were watching this video, there were different takeaways. So we thought we would ask council, what are your key takeaways? And is there anything that you saw in this video that you just, doesn't resonate with you?
But when they said, why are we building this garbage? It looked like St. Albert Trail. It's 100% St. Albert Trail.
It's very standard suburban
Yeah.
scale commercial development. Okay.
Oh, make the video for Ken.
No.
Please don't.
Others.
I think how, what struck me is in all of the graphs, how concentrated the peak was. And I would have thought over time, would have seen some kind of natural settling out and as things got dispersed, but so that kind of struck me as not weird, but it certainly it was a key takeaway that older downtown cores that are established and don't have the urban sprawl and they're quite a dramatic peak. And so I wonder, because that infrastructure was old and had to have been replaced over time somewhere, and were all the costs included in that replacement? Because like Guelph is, 100 years old, right? Like they can't be running on the same sewers and roads and pipes. They must have redone them like 3 times in that period, I would think.
They actually Ken knows this, they use better cement in the twenties than they did in the fifties, so.
Well, no, I mean.
You know more than I do.
Part of
the structure, part of the problem is the infrastructure. They said it was designed for 75, 80, 100 years, and it's only lasting a quarter of that time. So the construction materials they had at that time are considered like very similar to what we have. So I'm sure the discussion's been around, but don't assume that they've been replaced.
The other thing I was going to say though is that at the end of Guelph, and it doesn't have like high rises in the downtown. It's not a super high density downtown, and yet again the chart shows different, shows factual numbers that it's different. So I'm mentally struggling with the chart versus what I kind of would have naturally assumed.
To me, this is the challenge for St. Albert. How do you build a city of the future while still building St. Albert that everybody wants to come to? Because density is where you get all that return on your investment, right? So unless you want to build to the sky, you're going to have to balance it somehow. And to the point that Bill made earlier, it's about a holistic community that we offer to people, right? So that they can live, learn, work, and play here, whatever they want, and still find that life here is worthwhile. And so that to me is the challenge, understanding where your money comes from at the end of the day and where it goes. So if it's going to go to single family dwellings and the dense people are going to subsidize the suburbanites, people need to understand that. And perhaps there's a differential tax rate for densities. I don't know. But I don't know that people who come to St. Albert want the entire city to be, homogeneous construct of 5-story building, no matter what Leon looks like, and that's just my thought. And the challenge, quite honest, I think the fact that it's hard to do, if we get it right, and that's what makes it good. My thought.
I just have a challenge that the guy who did these videos clearly has an agenda. So like, this is not an objective. This entire YouTube channel appears to be a disgraced suburbia as it currently exists. So obviously all of his arguments will be slanted that way. All of his, there's lies, damn lies, and then statistics. So statistics can be used to use anything you want. Now, am I arguing that, obviously there's challenges when you have this? No. But he shows us the worst possible road possible, full of fast food chains, and says this is the other option. Whereas, so you said there needs to be something in all elements. There's a need for superstore and grocery stores and stuff that may not be the same, but will still need to eat there. You can't always go to the small shops necessarily. And you can only buy so much art. So like when you keep saying, well, we'll go there, we'll have all these little art and quaint boutiques. Okay, well, at some point your house is going to get full of art, but you're going to need other things that you still are going to need to have, right? So there is a purpose for some things. Do I love all fast food chains? No. But like, I challenged when I see a guy who's deliberately putting forward one message, and I know that's that message he's intending to portray. So that's the challenge that I see right now. Is I can see that there's value perhaps in looking at making it work cohesively, but yeah. And the thing too is that, even in suburbia, there's guys that are paying $40,000 a year right now. Their house is worth $5 million. They're subsidizing a whole lot of people. Like if you ask the guy, he'll say, "Did I get plowed first? Nope. Do I get anything more for paying $40,000 in taxes? No." So those people are also subsidizing in large part people who have lesser prices homes.
Make a good point, Councillor Hughes, because assessed values of single family dwellings are much higher than, let's say, an apartment condo. Apartment condo might be, the assessed value might be the average. I'm pulling this out of my head because it was 250 a little while ago, so probably closer to 300,000 this year. But the average single family dwelling we were just talking about, a new home, is double that, right? So some of those new homes. So if we were ever to go to tax policy, we can certainly split the residential, excuse me, not non-residential, the residential tax base. But we've got to be very careful in how we do that. And the argument's always been based on service. Well, I don't use St. Albert Transit, but I still subsidize that through my property taxes. So it's a much bigger argument, but it's certainly something that, the video doesn't necessarily explain. So it's an interesting argument.
And we were obviously aware that there's a clear bias in the video. It just articulated a discussion point better than we could in a few slides, in a more entertaining way than we could anyway. So.
It's entertaining. You have to look past the veil sometimes to see what are you actually trying to achieve and what do you actually agree with before you just blanketly agree with it, because he made some few comments. So, but per hectare, for sure, you'd make more money if you stack them. I mean, 250 times 5 is more than 1 times, one large house. But I think that guy that's paying $40,000 a year in property taxes is subsidizing a lot as well for the amount of that and stuff.
Yeah, you get into different discussions then, because there's still cost of servicing versus like what's the productivity per area, et cetera.
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot of ways you can evaluate something, right? Statistics is always one of the most challenging things because you can prove all sorts of things.
For sure.
Right? That's the one thing I realized in my degree with in my 4th year is that you could prove anything, including some guy thought he could prove that Freud was correct. So after I saw that, I realized how much you can manipulate a statistic to your benefit. That's
Thank you. Any other comments?
I throw it, for opportunities when I, look at St. Albert Trail, which is kind of the example that video game gave, I see Fowler, Fowler Way opens up. That's helping your traffic going right through St. Albert. And then it kind of provides so much opportunity to, put a medium density neighborhood on the parking lot of St. Albert Center or whatever, kind of through that density zone. So that's really where I see the big opportunity. It's like you get people who don't want to be in St. Albert to not be in St. Albert, and then you densify that medium strip. It's not impacting the existing neighborhoods, so you can still have your low density where people want to live in different places. And so that's where I see the opportunity.
With these roads, right? Yeah. There you go. That's a good.
It was a church with the big surface parking lot, and now it was a church with the big surface parking lot, and now it's
and
a lot of units.
So you were here when we zoned that, district to mixed use, and the mayor at the time went bonkos because he wanted it to keep the commercial
corridor, yes.
That traditional land use, right? And you just needed to see beyond that this will still have jobs, but the heat map will be very cool when I want to see it.
See it.
Nice.
There's a whole discussion about the trail too. Like we're not even touching it about whether you have streets for commercial or roads that are to get people through an area. And like the typical St. Albert Trail commercial is a mix of both, which then kind of complicates things. So your regulations are like get goods and services through, get people, and then your shopping areas, it gets complicated when people are trying to get from A to B, but then you got me out there kind of looking around, ooh, there's a sale over there. So there's challenges to that built environment that go beyond this discussion.
Not know that about your drive.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I get ridiculed. Very slow. Just out for a Sunday drive every day. All right, so I know that the much awaited component of this fiscal considerations and financial impact analyses. We've got a couple here. We can disseminate them maybe once I'm done in the next break here. But basically, so the whole point of this is to try to figure out how the information that we saw in that video relates to some of the case studies within our recent developments or recent investments in the city. Initial important step is to understand the revenue and expenses of any development, which we've kind of talked about already. And talking about that kind of what is a FIA, why do we do them, high level nuts and bolts of the FIA. Basically, they help us understand whether an investment will impact the overall financial health of the city. And to grow sustainably, St. Albert's development happen in a fiscally responsible manner. To do so requires planning for developing municipal infrastructure that effectively and efficiently meets the present and future growth needs of the city. The growth strategy and the associated built form does impact the overall financial health. So it's important that growth costs are equitably distributed and do not place an unsustainable burden on the city's financial resources. As such, every new area structure plan, well, and this is old now, as Christina pointed, so the old ASPs and now our neighborhood plans, and I don't know if we can figure out a patch for the in-betweens, the old ASPs conducted FIAs and the new NPs will have FIAs as well. Based on city tax assessments, which reflect the findings of the FIAs undertaken for every community, mixed use and industrial tend to provide the best return on investment for the city. And we must stress that the ROI for a land developer versus a city are two different things. So we look at them for different lenses. Where they make a profit, we may see operating losses for decades or longer, and vice versa. So when you hear select groups within the city that are, representing a business or a singular kind of a focus, just understand that. If you look at the city as a business, generally we probably wouldn't get into some of the low density residential at this point, just because you need somewhere else to pay that freight, which we kind of talked about already, like cost sharing, I guess, as it were, especially as you get less than 40 dwelling units per hectare. It just becomes, we've seen it with our FAs, they lose money for the city. However, as administration and council, we do need to invest in things that also don't bring ROI, like parks, trails, recreation centers, lift stations, all those things that are part of what services that a city provides. So it's not just simple as we like to make a FIA, it's not as simple as that. Like there's still going to be costs that we have to bear just in part of creating a community. As we've generally discussed, different built forms have different financial implications. And I guess I'll talk through some of these and then Stephen will chime in as if he sees that I'm off. This is not my area, so yeah. I'll just make it up. So next slide, here we go. So this is Nouveau. So low density residential, basically 500 and some units, a little bit of commercial there, projected assessed values, 205 million. So an assessment yield of 14.1 million per hectare.
Over its lifetime, or what does that mean? Like, it's not, is it free?
It's at 20 years, I think, is every all these numbers at 20 years, right?
I think so. That's the cumulative total.
It's an assumed build out at 20 years.
Yeah. So at 20 years is how much you're making a year, or how much you get after the total 20 years?
That's how much it's gonna be worth in theory in today's prices,
So
after it's fully built out.
So you can see the first red bullet there. For the 20 years while it's being developed, the assumption is that the city is losing almost 300,000 a year subsidizing that type of growth. That's what the FIA says. After 20 years, when that development is fully built out, and I guess all of those properties are paying taxes based on their assessed value and all the services that they're encumbering and et cetera, it drops down to about 57,000 a year that the city is subsidizing that form of development.
Couldn't they just pay $100 more in taxes and they can break even?
Well, see, I mean, that's That's not my area, that's Stephen's area, but.
So what these do is model, so this was back in 2013, you created your FIA, so they were
FIA is
modeling these at the time. So the first 20 years, they modeled it from, and we did this exercise in Lakeview as well. But this is the third party that we've got and it's contributed to the annual tax contribution. So I tried to replicate these numbers today and they weren't exact at all. So this is a model based on 2013. So it gives you that extra $500 a year with that many properties is not going to, it wouldn't likely come close to that. Now this, whether this is full build out or not, I assume any FIA would look at an absorption rate over so many years, right, of the entire thing. So there's a number of different factors that go into an FIA analysis, but certainly just adding additional tax dollars to new neighborhoods wouldn't necessarily cover these kind of losses. I'm gonna do some math on that, come back to you.
Because now I'm confused. So because, okay, so obviously as it builds out, the deficit will be less than that. So that's your average of that, right? So
It's just an average, yeah.
So the first year, on average, is $535 as it builds out, and then after the 20 years, it's $100 difference. What you're saying, because you're saying a negative 56,000 at the end of 20 years, right? So if those numbers are still consistent at the end of 20 years, Stephen, which I don't know, because you said the numbers change, so I don't know if they're better or worse.
Well, and we try to model them. We tried to model something similar right now, but again, we're halfway through the process. So this started with 2013, started mill rates in 2013, and then model projects them at that time. And we make the decisions on, at that point in time, we make the decisions based on the knowledge that we have. Now that we're, I wouldn't even call it midway through Nouveau, but now that we're at the start of Nouveau, I've tried to look at some of these numbers again, and you have to take those same assumptions, right?
So are the numbers better or worse when you've been looking at them better?
There's a similar concept to that. There's this, what we're looking at is assessing and communicating the infrastructure total investment is at the start and you're carrying a heavier burden. And then those operating costs for the police, fire are in those like latter years where you're getting there and the form of business cases coming. And you add the fire, police, etc. So it's that main concept, but this is giving a framework and communicating that. We're still, FIAs, we're still kind of analyzing and going through with the new model and assessing, bringing it in-house, but you're getting these same estimates. It's not exact to this because these were based on historical, but we would probably.
The numbers will change, but the story stays the same. Because whether you're using 2013 numbers for salaries, for infrastructure costs, whatever, or 2024, it's still gonna result in the same story. It might be maybe not negative 300,000 a year, it might be negative 350 or negative 250. It's just, but it's a comparative analysis for you to look at. The other thing is that the FIAs really look at a 20 to 25 year time horizon. They don't factor into the fact that after 25 years, or say maybe not 25, but say 35 or 40, you're needing to reinvest into these communities to improve the sidewalks, to improve the roads, to improve, and the reinvestment cost, that's not incorporated into that.
Well, basically, you're still saying for 20 years, we're still subsidizing $100 a house.
Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
if we were to pay $100 for a house, they would break you.
Are we allowed to do that?
That's the deal. Like, that's the situation we have right now.
Oh, we're trying to avoid raising taxes.
I understand that, but if you're saying that there's a subsidy happening, it's $100 a house.
And right now, we're talking about in specific areas, but of course, like we talked about before, we got to holistically look at investments of a balanced
So
city.
this neighborhood isn't necessarily making what you want in tax revenue, then the next one had better be a little more dense, because you may pick, council may choose to approve an R1 development, which is low density, and that's going to happen in the future. But then the neighborhood beside Nouveau better look a little different if we want to be even revenue neutral or whichever. You've got to look at the densities organically, not just in one neighborhood, but for the entire of the city.
Again, it's this balance. Like, we don't want to just say no more low debt. Like, that's not what we want for St. Albert, but it's trying to find that exact a complementary balance so that you don't end up too heavy in one form versus the other.
Well, there are case studies, right, of smaller communities who've gone hard over, so no more single family. We're gonna focus on this. And what that ended up doing was drive the demand, the affordability of single family homes. Right, and so, right, this is science underpinned by art, right, seen across the books, across the table, but I think the bottom line is that this perception that you build something and this is a windfall for the city is not always true, right? In point of fact, in many cases, you build something and the city incurs a cost to the city to maintain it, and that drives them, as you pointed out, what that ecosystem is.
It's gonna be the cost that you don't realize when you make the investment or that initial investment. It's just to kind of be aware of it.
Nouveau is currently just zero, well, not just, they've got 0 lot lines. Fairly dense, and it's got the big new apartment. 3 units, or whatever it is, multiplex coming in behind it, which is way more dense. And
This is 40 dwelling units per residential hectare is what it's planned for.
And those apartments, so what Nouveau proposed in their area structure plan are, those apartments are far fewer units than what was proposed. So what they're building there in the north now, far fewer than what they had proposed in the area structure plan. So they're coming in at a lower density than they were supposed to because they sold their land to whoever was willing to come in and build multi. So
Yeah, so if you have a lower density that comes in, you're gonna have an even bigger gap or deficit, right? So like, again, thinking back to some of those traditional communities that might be more in the 20-25, those numbers will look even redder.
The same should have read it together. Just so it's not red, we can say red.
Yeah.
You're red.
You're red. Yeah, so I guess I think that we've kind of covered this one to the extent that we probably need to, but I think the idea is just to understand when councils are being faced with these decisions, there's going to be costs or benefits to the city, and then you kind of have to look in that big picture. Because I know that was a discussion years ago too, is like, well, we still need rooftops in order to support the commercial. So we don't want to not approve this. Well, then, as Stephen said, then you have to be cognizant that if you've created a hole somewhere, then you need to create extra somewhere else to level it off. Otherwise, you will have to impact at some point your taxes.
A big portion is that is the split there. So you see the 94% residential and 6% commercial. So when you look at that, even our city is still 85-15, right? So that's not even meeting those kind of guidelines. So you really do have to look just beyond the one neighborhood. So things look bad now, and our next example, Adrian's going to come up with, it's a little bit better, and then finally,
Yeah, and just to be clear, it doesn't mean that this is evil or bad, right? Like in terms of the judgmental brag, it's just understanding the math that underpins it and looking at that as in its entirety, right? Right, there's nothing bad about people.
so this is our loss leader to get people to come into the grocery store and buy.
That's one working theory.
So where's our profit, our 4% profit margin?
So if we go over to South Riel, again, this is the U-line development. Well, not, I guess this isn't just U-line, but U-line is the primary portion of it. So 45.9 hectares, projected assessed value of 295 million, assessment yield of 6.36 per hectare. And this is all just straight industrial development. So at the end, you can see there's far fewer services that get used here. 2.53 million per year as it's built out, and then a little bit higher when it's finally done, 2.69 million.
We're assuming there's no tax increases for 20 years then, so that should be way higher after 20 years than 70.
I mean, these things are just simplified point in time, 2013 dollars. this is what all this was based on. We've updated a little bit last year, I guess. But this is just snapshots about understanding what the costs were. So again, like I mentioned about job density, South Riel isn't the highest job density. I think the Uline building has maybe 100 employees over about 40 acres, 30 acres. So 3 jobs per acre isn't overwhelming, but it serves a purpose and it provides revenue. So it's just understanding kind of the implications of these types of development.
Another important point there is you've got to remember the non-residential development is taxed at a higher rate. So 1.25 versus $1.
You also just build the both of them at once, like that whole property is built out within whatever, a year's time, whereas the neighborhood's built up a lot slower, so you can't get all the nice.
So this is.
The same
is
time frame.
The analysis for the industrial component, so it's not just the one parcel, it's actually for the whole industrial component of South Riel, which is. Yeah.
So, and it's a 20-year window.
Yeah.
That we're looking at everything.
But you're building out, like, the Uline built out like years.
Yeah, but it was one of many.
That's just an example.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And that was really, I think it was probably almost 10 years from the time that Quadriel bought those lands until the time that. Yeah, it's just.
Pictures throw me off, but sure.
Oh, no, yeah.
Aerial, aerial.
Okay, and then here's an example of kind of a mixed use development. So Riverbank Landing. 360 units on 3.65 hectares. Then there's 2.5 hectares of commercial as well. So the projected value is 291 million, 73 million per hectare. So versus 6 million per hectare for South Riel and 14 million per hectare for Nouveau. So again, it's just kind of different leagues as far as the return on investment. So this will be one of the spikes on the map.
And if you look at the total area, you compare it to others, what was it? South Riel
is 46 hectares. So, and Nouveau is about 14 hectares. So 15 hectares.
Kind of goes to show you where the spike is.
So it doesn't bring in as much, but it's balancing that idea of the residential costs with the commercial costs.
So it's a good time to discuss some financial considerations of growth. At first glance, Flourish does not appear to be a financial document, but the direction it provides does have larger revenue and expense implications for the city of St. Albert. It's truly a financially sustainable plan for the city because it's allowing the city to grow, but at the same time balancing those impacts, which can include that initial infrastructure like we talked about, that investment and the operating impacts. So that's something key to kind of keep in mind as we look at that plan and kind of align our discussions. Mayor, you mentioned, do we change course on our plan or do we stay on that plan? But these are the considerations, the information to take into consideration if you're doing that with decision making. This is essentially taking that same concept that we just talked about in regards to like our long-term debt strategy, where we talked about the servicing of debt in future. This is taking it up to say, hey, our investment decisions, when we look holistically, how are they impacting the city? And so it's that holistic long-term like servicing and financing. And this is the discussion of that. So it's kind of bringing us up to that holistic. So Stephen and I are going to kind of tag team, kind of if councils or administration are working together from a theoretical component case study of competing investments X and Y, what's kind of some of the questions we would discuss to apply this lens. So think of the prioritization has happened. we either have a new development or we have a business case we're looking at. These are the additional lens and conversations that we would have to apply.
And these are conversations we have around finance all the time. So are we optimizing our current infrastructure? So road, services, utilities, we've talked about those a few times.
So is this investment in a high priority that has been identified for outward growth or for inward growth? And if it's not, then is this the right time to, it's kind of maybe that check and balance to say, hey, should we be investing now? Or are we changing course?
So how does this affect our current projects? Negatively, positively? If we were to open up Fowler Way, what would it do to St. Albert Trail? Those are questions we have. Are other projects we're going to need to be funded, or is this a result of others having to be deferred?
Yeah, so our other, like we talked about, what's the whole infrastructure required? So if we build that road, well, we're gonna need the asphalt to get there. We're gonna need to buy the land. We're gonna need to do the utilities, but sometimes we don't always think of it all together. We'll think of a capital project or some investment separately. But as we can see by the FIAs in these conversations, there's revenue expense components. And not only that, then there's infrastructure requirements to support it. So it's just that concept, and that's not even the operating impacts. So we kind of opened our eyes and from the videos and seen, oh, there's actually costs that we haven't taken into consideration with these investments, and it's maybe just find that lens. And does it balance our investments between inward and outward growth? Like we discussed, outward growth requires lots of infrastructure investment. If we're already in investment at the time where we're looking outward, do we balance and try to achieve that 30% goal inward where we already have the current infrastructure and service? So that's where we start applying that lens holistically to balance that and to kind of balance our offsets and costs.
Are these servicing, that have any inward benefits?
Don't jump ahead and ruin the plot.
This is a theoretical, but that is a good conversation, right?
Makes it very hard when you put it in that.
In context. These are and those are the lens to apply. It is to, are we on course in certain ways, and where are the costs?
To be clear, this is a code for North Service, right? Like that wasn't right. Yeah.
It's for all investments.
It's the biggest project. Right, emphasize like, so.
And then does it align with our debt, our overall funding strategy by considering future tax and infrastructure impacts to the city?
And so like the FIA that we went through, those are essentially communicating future costs that will, and just estimating high level. It's to give that view. But we have to provide that broader lens to factor in, because it's all coming from the same ratepayers. So we have to take that in and understand those future implications of these decisions. Is it financially sustainable considering that broader bundle? So if we factored in the total cost in the investment, does this create unsustainable tax increases in future years? So if we are going through infrastructure requirements and changes, at the same time, we're investing somewhere we're gonna have to build or do a future basin or do a bunch of servicing. Are those costs going to have to come on all at the same time? And that's why we talked about 3 different services basins. We're trying to maybe balance the growth to be slow and be able to achieve and to carry that burden in those areas before then we move on to the next one.
And if the ROI is negative, have we recently invested in other things that have offsetting impacts? We talked about the Nouveau example. We look at a number of different things in the city. The last I heard is parks don't generate a lot of tax revenue, lift stations and all those utility right of ways that we walk down, or ERs or MRs. I was walking by the river the other day, and it's definitely an advantage living in the state of St. Albert, but I can tell you the tax revenue from that, from my perspective, is zero, but it certainly has a benefit. So there are going to be ROIs that are negative. It's just how we offset those ROIs, excuse me.
Yeah. So these kind of discussions are just highlighting the importance of applying that lens. And then into the decision-making process to determine if it's the right time to invest in X or Y, and just considering those future impacts. So our residents and businesses, like I just said, need to fund and carry these impacts. So this holistic lens needs to be evaluated to balance that future impact. And what this slide is intended to demonstrate is that ripple effect or the interconnectedness of all our decisions. So like we've all seen in the video and discussed, one decision on its face could have unanticipated outward implications to a multitude of other areas or decisions. For example, a relatively simple decision like funding a future road alignment has an attached cost. But the future road alignment will then need servicing, which carries its own price tag, like we've talked in length at. But once the servicing and infrastructure goes in, the land then becomes more attractive for development, which could be considered a good thing. But on the other hand, servicing could also result in demand for leapfrog development or disincentivizing investment in existing servicing areas. Development within the newer areas could lead to empty storefronts in existing areas. So are we building out at the cost of not supporting current businesses? That's something that sometimes we have to consider.
And I think that goes to the question that you asked at the very, very beginning about why aren't some of these sites along St. Albert Trail getting reinvested in? Greenfield is maybe eating its lunch a little.
And then on top of all these considerations, the more servicing basins that are brought online, the more debts that's being carried to service these basins at the same time. And this can affect a slower payback on the debt and growth in those areas. That will then lead to our offsite levies being higher. If we're trying to develop in too many areas, we can be reducing our attractiveness on the whole. So that's other parameters that we kind of have to take into consideration that we might not initially have thought. So one of the things you might want to consider is what the FIA says. What is the FIA saying about this proposed development? Is it revenue positive? Should it be? Do we need to evaluate this FIA or are we balancing it with other investments? And when does it make sense to invest? So just we wanted to prioritize development by not only the income and expense it generates, but with all these flourished principles talked about today within the MDP to ensure that we're growing as planned and to keep that momentum in the right direction, rather than creating conflicting priorities that impact not only the financial sustainability, but also our organizational capacity. Next slide. So what do we do with this knowledge? We need to understand the true impacts of our asks and our decisions and look at from that broader lens in order to keep us both physically and financially sustainable. So question for council, after based on the discussion today and kind of watching the videos, is there additional considerations or questions that you think that we should be asking or evaluating as that additional lens with Flourish after we've prioritized before we make an investment?
And maybe I could just offer a comment in the tear line, right? And so I think what you broadly see there are the administrative planning and financial questions that underpin that. The public good question ultimately sits with this with you as council, right? That's not us. Our job is to inform that. Right?
We need to keep in consideration the soft costs, because everything I've heard about is just this is the FIF hard costs. But if you put up an apartment building, you need 1,000 people in an apartment building, that's now need another police officer because we have 1 per 1,000 and other thresholds. Then
it's included.
You're including all of the soft costs.
Yeah, so I didn't get into it, but when I send this around, I've flagged the pages. So there's the new infrastructure requirements, there's the RMR requirements, and then there's the operating requirements. So for example, fire and ambulance, 1 fire station with apparatus, cost of $17.2 million, updated 2018 per 26,000 population in new growth areas.
All the thresholds.
Police space requirements of 25 meters, 25 square meters per additional officer, and then that gets factored in. By law enforcement gets factored in. Transportation, public transit, water, sanitary sewer, waste, stormwater, governance, administration, fiscal services, arts and culture, recreation, library, all these things. When applications tried to create this, they spent a ton of time visiting with all the departments, trying to understand the cost per servicing in these new areas and trying to put numbers to it. And it may not be 100%, but it's a uniform across the board kind of metric that we can use to try to understand what it means for the city when we bring on a new quarter section of land. What does that mean? So, yeah, we tried to be fairly comprehensive with this. And there might be some things missing for sure, but a lot of the big items are there.
Appreciate that.
But what about the soft costs? So you bring in families that you wouldn't even think of looking at St. Albert. You bring them in to an area like Nouveau because other than the show homes, maybe they can afford some of those homes. And then they put their kids in the schools. They put their kids in swimming programs. They put their kids in art programs. They put their grandparents in because they want to be closer to their families. So now you had grandparents in there before. Now, when they never would have considered coming into our community before. Now those grandparents are active in going to arts and culture events. They take their kids to soccer. They all of those costs that are what I consider public good, those costs that that don't have a hard ROI or a FIA. How do you factor those in?
So that's done through other plans through the city and then also through the decisions that council makes.
So, I mean,
It's not in a FIA, right?
there's
Like,
not a hard cost.
that's what we're saying, just again, to Bill's point, low density residential isn't evil, like that's not the intent of this. It's meant to say that has a role and a function, and it's really important for the overall sustainability and livability of the community. But just making sure that we're, again, making that complete community.
I agree, but I just wanted to say, part of it was, how do you measure that other than you have to have a feel for it.
Yeah. So, but it only measures city supply services.
So it includes the developer supplied infrastructure.
Let's talk about soccer, for example.
Yeah.
It's run not by the city. So now we have 3 more kids in this community. That's 3 more that are enrolled in soccer, for example. That not-for-profit now needs to have more kids. That's probably not included. Or doctors.
Well, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, that's beyond the scope of,
Totally.
You're talking about like tenant autonomous in a room just for a year, knocking it out.
Well, I mean, yeah, if somebody would have been able to, you would have had a nice YouTube video of that too, that the answer.
And that goes back to value statements, which were captured through Flourish, right? People, we went out and asked, I think we had, 17 points of contact, 17,000 points of contact with the residents in the business community, right? To get those values, to get like what was important. And again, like sustainable growth was listed as the highest valued area, the thing that the residents said that we really needed to focus on.
I don't know how they perceive those words though.
So that's where when we put together the goal statements, it was based upon their words as well.
Because the people who are living in single family homes and large lots don't necessarily say, you know what, we need. Need more info right beside. Show some apartment buildings here too, because it's the same. But I don't think
We did hear a lot about wanting their family members to stay in St. Albert and to live in St. Albert, and so that their kids could to stay here, they didn't have to go to Edmonton, and that they could retire here as well and find affordable housing.
Yeah, but one of the challenges is when you want to retire here is that you don't want stairs, and everything we see that's tall and narrow. You're 75, you don't want just stairs. You want to have like no stairs in your life.
Mike runs up and down them all the time.
That's why all the seniors are moving into Britannica. Because it's like no stairs. Like that's the challenge is that all these other homes, like a lot of people want to move to a smaller home, but they also want to be a bungalow, but now our sizes don't really facilitate that.
Yeah.
So that's the other challenge.
And the cost with the bungalow too. They're very expensive.
Yeah.
I think that, there's no silver bullet, right? At the end of the day, it's a pretty complex web. I said there's a lot of science that goes into this, but then there's the art that underpins it, and then there's the public bid. The council is trying to determine. So, as was said, Stephen being Stephen, like pay taxes from the river. But imagine St. Albert without, right? And you know, and so.
You're the one with the minesweeper.
Like it for quarter.
I was thinking that with you.
You know.
Imagine that river walk that was riddled with restaurants and coffee shops facing the river. So now that river is providing value to the commercial.
It does, and so, you know, those discussions, and I think, you know, again, the sort of the layperson takeaway from this, right, is that the decisions made, ideally, you know, our job is to inform your decisions, but informing it as best we can, looking at the entirety of the footprint or the entirety of the entity that is St. Albert. Right, and so how do we evolve? How do we enable all those principles, all those goals, right, that goes to in the NDP flourish, right, that drives all of that to enable council's strategic priorities.
So like this checklist on the screen should be less in our agenda. Doing a subdivision or area structure, but just as a reminder, you know, think about these things. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, if we had showed the FIA for Nouveau to strata developments and said, you know, this is why we're pushing density and 40 units per hectare, would they agree with those numbers, or would
They had to do the FIA. Right?
Yeah.
that they're using old calculations, right?
Some of it was updated in 2018 for that.
Oh, it was updated. Oh, okay.
It was based on a 2013 and then an update to that. So it still tells the general picture. Yeah.
That means stage 3 has to be bigger for them.
Strata?
Yeah, like their final build out of their stage. Because they sold that to the other one, does that mean to meet the MRV requirements, now they're gonna have to make a really bigger density commitment in their last final stage?
They're supposed to, like, they can't make their density the way that they're planned right now. They have to figure out what they're going to do.
It's not gonna be 20 years down the road.
They've been developing pretty quickly.
I think, you know, kind of looking at that Jensen Lakes example, because the densities are still lower, even though the whole, like, you look at their ASP, all of their higher density development is in the last and final stages.
Which is common for most of our developers. They're primarily residential developers, and they always say, like I said, that these multi-sites are the bane of their existence. So they build all of the other stuff and then they fill in at the end. Except for with this market now, we've seen a turn of the tides a little bit.
Any other considerations before we move on?
For me, I mean, I for every single decision, I'm thinking about aging in place.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about my great grandchildren. Really, that's what I'm thinking. And without thinking about those people, I think we forget that it's people. I think Ken talked about that. None of it matter. And if something today is going to hurt my great grandchildren, well, I don't want to do it. So, you know, something we're doing today is going to make it so that my parents have to leave St. Albert because there's nothing here for them. Well, I don't want to do it. And those are just my two highest priorities, and the rest of us can figure it out. And I don't know how you put that into a model. Yeah.
I think just in general, the concept is that along with diversity, you create opportunities for people to stay within it, to move into a community and then to be able to stay in the community, hopefully. And then just, there's a lot of devils and details here between those 2 points. But
Okay, so you usually see this at the beginning of the presentation, but the good news is that this time is almost at the end, so we almost made it.
One more slide.
But you know, part of decision making and how we internally make sure that we evolve and enhance alignment and how decisions are made and information that we bring forward to council is through maturing this system thinking approach. That recognizes that decision made at every element of this framework impacts another decision made somewhere else. So, we start and we talked about municipal development plan today, but we talked about the direction only for one of the goals in MVP, which is sustainable growth. There are other elements of MVP that provide that balanced approach to community, such as community well-being, choices, housing, and so on. So with the municipal development plan that's more 30 years out, we focus on long-range strategies that are then 10 years out. And provide a bit more closer, kind of focus. And then as we work with councils to develop a 4-year council plan, that then takes hopefully aligned approach to where the community is going, that focuses on the 4-year term, recognizing that a lot of decisions that councils make go way past that 4-year term. We use that information to develop actions throughout the organization that get incorporated into department plans. And of course, ultimately, everything impacts the budget. As council is receiving reports and requests from administration, more on the actioning side, decisions that you will be asked to make related to presentation today would be through area structure plan requests or, other work that planning and development is doing. As well as through budget requests such as capital charters and business cases. So that balanced approach and that holistic approach to look at decisions that are being made and impacts on other areas is very important. So with that,
just the way St. Albert is growing is changing and evolving. And with that change comes the need to adapt our decision-making in regards to growth investments. Decisions made in alignment of long-term plans and direction informed by analysis of broader implications and return on investments are the key to our overall success. Decisions made today have long-term impacts on our community and often broader implications to the community as a whole. These implications need to be considered with each and every decision in order to support a sustainable community that can grow and takes into the impacts on future generations. The councillors, you guys have all said this through all the questions and even those initial definitions of sustainable growth. You basically identified all the things that we talked about today at the very start of our presentation, where you wanted to make sure, Councillor Jello, that we were taking in regard to maintaining and replacing infrastructure. Broadhead was build a St. Albert that can grow, but can balance the old parts also, and takes into account that future. Councillor Byrne-Mansky said, we're not growing beyond ourselves. Councillor Hughes, we have to be able to fund our replacement. Councillor Killick said, a lot of cities grow too quick and they crumble. And Mayor Heron said, slow and steady growth. And these have all been factored in a huge part of the discussion today. So it defines the sustainable community. So in the upcoming months, you'll be asked to consider investments into some significant projects. It's important to evaluate these decisions with that broader lens discussed today to support the city's sustainability.
And I guess I'll just add on, hopefully this we've raised at least points or some ideas to consider. I think the idea is that fortunately we've got a plan that council has already approved, which provides direction for sustainable growth in the city. And it outlines kind of what the council's priority areas are or what council's priorities are to create that well-balanced community that we've been talking about a little bit here. So we're very fortunate that we have that, and that can help work us through these other strategic and business plans to help inform decisions, ensure proper alignment, ensure appropriate delivery of services, and balance impacts to future budgets. And well, I missed a line. I missed when basically the idea is you guys are going to have difficult challenges, and you've already experienced that through your roles, but just the notion that in your job you have to make these difficult decisions about prioritizing where limited resources are allocated, and hopefully we've provided some information there. I think was it F. Sonnenberg had said when everything is who's F. Sonnenberg? Sonnenberg, somebody Sonnenberg. When everything is a priority then nothing is a priority. So again, it's kind of that challenge to kind of go back to what the city's priorities are and then how does
It's making up stuff.
I don't know. I don't know. Might have blacked out when I wrote that. I don't. But, yeah, the idea is what what are the city's priorities? We've got a plan that kind of paints that path, but hopefully we've provided you some information on kind of the fiscal impact and density and infill and intensification that help to kind of give you things to think about when you're having to make these difficult decisions. And we're happy to answer any additional questions that you have, or if you've got any feedback.
Did you guys want anything from us, I guess, if you were you looking for not a strategic directional pivot or change, but just a sense of.
Not really at this stage. I think
I mean,
today-
I heard some conflicting stuff from that.
So, I think today was really about a discussion planting a seed, right? And so this is something to chew on. I think it provides some insight into the analysis that goes into administrative recommendations to support the analysis that comes forward. Right, and perhaps a little bit of theory. At the end of the day, you as council, on behalf of the citizens, have a vision for what is St. Albert, right? And this is how we kind of enable that going forward. So I would say not today, it's probably something to think about. There will be more discussions to come. As we talk about housing, as we talk about some of the big projects going forward. If you have an epiphany and you want to send it to us, please do. That would be valued, absolutely, right? But we were not looking for a council consensus sort of direction today.
I think one kind of question that's kind of sitting on for a moment, but it's maybe directed to Mike, and it's the linkage between.
You wondered when you were here, eh?
It's that linkage between saying when does a commercial developer or business developer look at a community and say, you're the right mix of residential that I know my workers can kind of afford to live there and the right mix of residential. My sense is we don't need to attract residential we don't need to actively attract it. It is happening organically. The developers are doing it. Everybody knows St. Albert's a great place to live. But is there something that business developers look at and say, that's why I'm going to pick St. Albert, Lakeview, as opposed to, Atchison or Leduc or whatever? Is there something that
Austin's a good case study.
glues it together?
Across sectors, across residential, commercial, industrial, is that what you're looking at?
Yeah.
I mean, I would probably just go back to business fundamentals, right? Do they think there's an opportunity to make profit within that community? Is the risk low enough relative to the potential return of that investment? I think it's the analysis is much more complex than that, but I think that's really.
They don't look at the rest of the residential part of St. Albert and say, oh, that's a nice place for me to locate my business. They're looking at just hard numbers primarily.
I think it depends on the industry. I think it depends on the business, right? Like for each, it's going to be different. And we've heard, and you were part of a tour where a business owner talked about how beautiful a community looked and how that had an impact on them. A little bit unique, private business, no shareholders. The owner could make the executive decision on that. But that was something that factored into their decision. Today we're on a call where they were talking. That was one of the questions that came up. They wanted to know about very large scale business, but asking lots of questions about residential barriers to building houses or to residential development within the community. Yeah.
Yeah, recently we had, the discussion about willing to pay a little more in tax for transit. That's offset by. It's got to make economic sense at the ground floor, right? So.
People, like, when you're talking about employment areas, they need people to work in these employment areas, and they want to make sure that people have access to quality housing and the housing that will reflect their workers. We heard at some point we need some more we might need more rentals, right? That was something that you had heard through some.
Yeah.
You know what I'd love to see is how we could make the niche development tax neutral. Like, we used to put commercial in like all these. And then they have like those little commercial strips or something. Then Woodlands hit. Oh, I've been there a long time. And Woodlands hit, and they were like, we don't want to have any commercial in there because, we don't want to be near a convenience store because bad things happen around, kids get in there. That was the impressions people had. Right? As opposed to saying, yeah, we're still going to put in some commercial. So what I'm curious about, because at the end of the 20 years, you're saying it's -56. If we actually had one section that had commercial, that would change the number structures.
That neighborhood did have 6% that was commercial.
Well, I guess what would be the structure? Does it have to be 8%? So we'd go to neutral is the question. Like,
If you were asking my opinion from a basis right now, I think we have to start looking at multi-res, but we have to start focusing. And I think our reporting will soon be focusing more on multi-res. So it's not necessarily we're getting commercial development or more commercial. That's good. Nothing wrong with that. And industrial for sure, but certainly we have to look at multi-res and start looking at that.
and mix and mix.
Yes, and mix, multi and mixed, yeah. So pretty much the same thing. We have to start looking at those types of developments and how much more, because the density, we noted in the slides, between the FIA analysis, the density on a 3-acre hectare site, almost competing with something that was 40 hectares. It's just incredible to think that when you're talking about your overall tax revenue.
No, not niche. I meant like the Nouveau stuff. So I look at Nouveau and like, we're like, it's showing it's -56. And I'm like, where does the numbers need to tweak? So that we can say, not necessarily that this is a carte blanche solution, but what is it like? If we had, you said we might have one mixed use development in there in addition to, how would those numbers actually change that we wouldn't be subsidizing them? I understand that in some cases they're net positive.
The heat map what I'm going to show is this map.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not perfect because we don't have the exact values but this is the goal of Flourish, is see where it gets a little bit darker. That's kind of your more intensity node. Yeah. So that's where, say, for within Sherwood, there's an intensity node. So that's where, when you look at the St. Albert West Area Structure Plan, we've put in a mixed-use commercial residential neighborhood within there. So that's where some of that commercial development's going to be, some apartments. We're still at the beginning stages, so sometimes mixed use is not always vertical, but it can also be horizontal. But that's where the policies are to help get a little bit more development.
So going forward, you'll see more of those complete communities that do have a minimum proportion of commercial. Going back to Nouveau, they have a little bit of commercial. To get an ASP amendment that would be revenue neutral, I think you'd have to, it wouldn't be super challenging, but you would force intensification, or there would be some.
Nouveau has specific challenges because it's small.
It was
a very small area, so like it makes it a little bit more difficult for them. So I don't want to like pick on that development. That's not the intent. It was just a recent example of what a 40 DU neighborhood looks like. But yeah, the higher percentage you have of that commercial or commercial mixed use. But there's only so much commercial that a neighborhood and a population can support. So it's also that. So that's why density is also an important tool that we have to help the sustainable.
Western's, jump in.
Yeah, and so I came into the meeting today asking if this was a public meeting. And the reason why I asked that is that we're here and we're getting this information and we're the decision makers to be sure, but we make those decisions within a public context. And unless the very people that we serve are brought along, at least to a general understanding, they're going to be packing the gallery saying, why are we doing that? And it's very difficult politically then to make the courageous decisions to do things. And so to me, that's the massive challenge before us, is not only to figure out what it looks like, but then to communicate that to the public so that they can come along with us, or at least, not throw out the anchors. And so, because it's difficult when the gallery's booing you. That's the reality of life. And so, but if we want to do this, then we actually have to communicate to them so that they can understand. Oh, there's a reason. And oh, by the way, we're still going to honor what was built. We're still going to have green space. We're still going to have canopy, but we need to build it differently so that we can actually afford it. No, by the way, we're still addicted to assessment growth. So we want the city to grow, and that's just my thought after all of this. It's just, how do you communicate?
Notice a small shift in the second Riverbank public hearing. When we had residents coming and saying, we need to build up for all over agriculture land. I'm like,
Yeah.
like that.
Well,
was
even
good.
the ones in Oakmont were saying this is good for St. Albert, provided it's over there.
Oh, yeah.
When
But I feel like people are starting.
yeah, they're starting to get it. Yeah. It's still, I think we're still
The more we can do to.
more we can do.
Sorry, Council, I just like to thank the teams.
I
This
was
was
gonna
a
do
ton
that.
of work that
Yeah,
went
a
into
lot of
this
work.
amongst the folks who presented and, hopefully it was useful across the board, but just wanted to recognize the heavy lifting that went into this across the board. So,
Thought provoking is the word of the
Yeah.
day.
It was good. Glad we did it.
Yeah.
Right away.
Just throwing it out there, the youth advisory committee is super interested in this stuff, probably not enough to watch a 3-hour video. But seriously, like, they find it fascinating and they're interested in the financial impacts, the social impacts. And if we can get, a bunch of 15, 16, 20-year-olds interested in that, that means when they're homeowners in 15 years, they're going to be packing the gallery in a different way. And I think there's absolutely opportunity to have those conversations with young people, and I don't think we prioritize them.
Yeah.
And again, remembering Flourish is kind of looking at a 30-year time horizon. So again, to your point about the youth, like, that's the market, that's the people who are going to be most impacted by change, because intensification and infill doesn't happen overnight. It's very slow. So you're not going to, the house that's right next to me, it's still in pretty good shape. It's probably going to be that way for the next 20 years. It's not changing anytime soon. So sometimes it seems scarier than it might be too.
Okay, we're done. Thanks, guys.